Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into a world where beauty wasn't just painful, it was downright terrifying. Picture this. It's the Middle Ages. And if you want to be considered beautiful, you basically have to look half dead. I think ghostly, pale skin, sunken cheeks and eyes so shadowed, they might as well be bruises. You probably won't survive this. But don't worry, it's just a bedtime story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a cold stone chamber. Candles guttering. The air a blend of beeswax and damp wool. A warped bronze mirror stares back. Tonight's assignment is simple and impossible. Make your face prove you belong. In the medieval West, beauty isn't pleasure. It's paperwork, class papers, moral credentials, a letter of recommendation to heaven. The correct look is almost funereal. Ghost pale skin, veins a faint blue web at the temples, cheeks gently hollowed, eyes shadowed, as if sleep has been treated as a rumor. You are expected to look like a saint who still remembers how to breathe. Why this face? Because in a world policed by sermon, rumor, and heraldry, the body speaks faster than you can. Tan says, field work. Rosiness says, heat and appetite. Pallor announces distance from labor. Distance from the sun, distance ideally from earthly hungers. Stand beside a nobleman in the great hall and let the firelight skate off skin made deliberately bloodless. You've done half your social labor without opening your mouth. Medicine, at least the medicine of Galen, and the schoolroom backs the theatre. 4 humours keep score. Blood hot wet, phlegm, cold wet, yellow bile, hot dry, black bile cold dry. Balance is health. Excess heat is trouble. Heat inflames, reddens, quickens pulse and temper. Soa cooler. Paler complexion reads as temperate and controlled, closer to the calm of contemplation than the flush of appetite. You do not need to recite Aristotle to perform virtue. You can simply drain the color from your face and let onlookers infer a soul at room temperature. Painters help. They are not interested in your pores. Panel and parchment filter you through theology. Smooth, untroubled planes of skin. A high, clean brow, mouth quiet as a reliquary. It's not realism, it's reassurance. The workshop knows what holiness is supposed to look like. And pseudo-patrons, a saint is white lead and gold leaf. A lady should rhyme with her. Whether Elizabeth of York actually glided through her life with that snow-bloom stillness, or whether a painter kept sanding her down into virtue with his brush, is beside the point. The image performs the category keeps the world tidy. Meanwhile, outdoors, life has the wrong color. Peasant women are oxygen pink and sun brown, arms roped with work, laughter loud enough to carry across a yard. They are not graded as beautiful by the court, they are graded as alarming. We might call those bodies healthy. An earl's steward calls them evidence. The face becomes a ledger. Even a good harvest can turn your skin into a confession. There is comedy here, though it's the kind that snags. A society terrified of sweat demands that women move through overheated rooms layered in wool, brocade, and velvet, and then punishes the flush they can't prevent. A faith that praises truth teaches you to lie with your complexion every day. The lie has rules. Do not beam, do not redden, do not glow, except in the way wax glows, from light struck upon it, not from within. You sit at the mirror and try on the correct emptiness. The room coaxes you into role. You practice the downcast gazepius. Yes, but also useful. Eyes lowered are eyes that cannot be accused of thinking too loudly. You pull your shoulders into serenity. You remember to become a silhouette that implies softness without appetite, fragility without sickness, humility without humiliation. You are building a readable woman. Scholars will argue, later, about how literal all this really was. How many ladies truly bleach themselves toward oblivion, and how much of it belonged to poetry, painting, and the anxious fantasies of men who wrote the rules? The paper trail is tricky. Diaries whisper and inventories lie, but the silence is the loudest witness. No surviving manual cheerfully begins. Here's how to look like yourself. The instructions are always toward erasure, toward calm, toward the absence of heat. And when there are tips, they come edged. A lemon wedge pressed to the cheeks to drain the plumpness. A warning to avoid the sun not merely for comfort, but for soul. A painter's trick that lengthens a brow and thins a jaw. On panel first, then in life, even body language is drafted into the job. You learn to move in small units, to laugh with your mouth closed, to accept that the body you're optimizing for isn't built to run. The church does not invent this, but it blesses it. Look at the Marian panels. Look at the calm that never cracks. The Virgin's face is an icon of what you are told to be. Whiter than flour, unlined as morning, unstartled by hunger, untouched by sun. In the nave she is miracle. In the bedchamber she is measuring rod. Even your house altar conspires. A saint's little portrait near your comb and pins. Gaze reminding you that holiness has a texture chalky and a temperature cool. Across the hall, the gap widens. A girl who returns from a hunt with cheeks blown bright by wind is praised for courage, and then quietly corrected by her aunt with a bowl of rosewater and a cloth. A cousin married into a merchant family lets her sleeves ride up while kneading dough. A visiting canon watches, frowns, and tells a story at supper about Eva and heat. Meanwhile, a lady's portrait arrives from a city painter. The cheeks are a touch too alive. A steward coughs delicately and asks the artist to cool the temperament a shade. Next week, the face comes back, more obedient. This is the deal, whispered everywhere and printed nowhere. Beauty equals wealth equals virtue. It is not logic. It is enforcement. A clean white soul lives in a clean white face. A laboring body must be guilty of something. Appear as such, the world says, and we will believe you are as such. It is a quick door into safety, a quicker door out. You can step aside from it, in pockets. Rural women often do, because survival is louder than fashion. But at court, the contract is binding. There is no do-you movement, no indulgent aunt murmuring that everyone is lovely in her own way. If you miss the mark, if the sun kisses you, if your cheeks remember blood, if you look too much like a person, you are not merely unfashionable. You are suspect, maybe lazy, maybe lustful, maybe poor, maybe both. And yet the theatre has its thrills, its tiny victories. You learn angles and shadows. You learn where to stand in a chapel, so the window will wash your face into legend. You learn, in summer, which corridor is coldest. You learn to keep a small reserve of unpainted self for after midnight, when the mirror tells a different story back. For now, the day's performance waits in a small wooden box beside the mirror ointment. Powders, tricks, you haven't touched them yet. That will be tomorrow's problem. Tonight is just the rehearsal of the face. The contract recited in quiet. You will look like distance from hunger. You will look like distance from heat. You will look like distance from work. If you can make your skin say all that, the world will let you pass. Hold the gaze one more moment. Practice the breath that does not lift the chest. Imagine the candle's flame reflected where the pulse should be. Then blow it out, and the room goes velvet. Even in the dark, you can see the face you are expected to wear tomorrow. Alabaster, obedient, a little bit gone. Next, we open the box. Next, we learn how a person makes a corpse glow. Open the box. A walnut lid lifts on small instruments and bigger lies. A pinched pot of white paste. A stick of rouge wrapped in linen. A vial that smells like a quarrel between vinegar and metal. Another that shines like quicksilver, trapped in glass. There's a ribboned bundle of leeches, sluggish as spilled ink. There's chalk, ground fine as prayer. Everything here promises the same miracle. In different dialects, make the living look unmoved by life. Start with the white. It has a pedigree older than your chapel. Plates of lead left to steep in vinegar. the vapor coaxing a white crust called ceruse. Apothecaries age it in clay, pound it to snow, and sell it as innocence. On your skin it is cool at first, then grabs. It blurs freckles into doctrine, turns heat to hush, smooths the story of your days into a single sanctioned page. You have heard what it does beneath the calm, how it gnaws, how it gets in the blood, and teaches hands to tremble. But that is a future problem. Today, your duty is to be read correctly. Ceruse alone makes a moon. A moon needs orbiting color. You dab your rouge cinnabar if you're rich. Alkanet root if you're practical into. A grief kisset pink. Not happiness, not appetite, just proof that blood exists somewhere deep and well managed. The trick is to look like you could stop breathing beautifully. You will learn the loop quickly. The white hides a blemish. The white causes a wound. The wound needs more white. There is a lady everyone praises for her porcelain skin. Her maid now steers the brush around new raw places like a boat, avoiding shoals. For devotion, the lady says when she adds a second layer, she means it. In this world, suffering that looks like virtue often counts as virtue. Pigment becomes penance. If a dark spot defies the white, the vial of mercury offers a sharper sermon. It is sold as a vanishing act for freckles. Zun, age. You smear a grain beneath a cloth mask and bind it in place overnight while the quicksilver whispers to your nerves. In the morning, the blemish is quieter, and so are your hands. You will call that price fair until the day your handwriting changes. Not everyone can afford poison with a name. The merchant's daughter uses chalk and flour paste. The miner lady crushes alabaster and smooths it with egg white. A country cousin stirs bread, honey, and herb water into a mask that smells like a kitchen blessing. There are softer recipes in women's books: rose water, vinegar, milk that do less harm, and more little. But the court prefers certainty. White lead is certain. Mercury is certain. The face becomes an altar where certainty is offered. If you are serious about pallor, and you must be, there is a darker art. Less blood in the face. Because there is less blood, leeches do the delicate work your own hands cannot. Along the temples, under the jaw, sometimes along the breastbone where blue map lines please the eye. They drink heat away. Italy loves them. Physicians invoice them. Maids give them little names and keep them in bowls. You sit very still and pretend not to taste iron. Someone yokes, gently, that you are a saint being relived of worldly warmth. You can empty your plate, too. Hollowed cheeks red as spiritual architecture. A girl once whispered that lemons drawn across the skin move the plumpness, as if flesh were obedient wax. Whether that is true matters less than the performance of care. At supper, take a wedge, hold it like a charm, barely eat. You are not starving. You are keeping a devotion. People almost clap. Still, none of this is purely chemical. The room is part of the recipe. Painters have taught you this. How a white face in shade looks like theology. How a raised brow makes you clever without making you loud. How a mouth barely opened cannot confess to wanting. Artists are your unacknowledged tutors. They airbrush saints into glass cool stillness and then spend the same pigments on you. If your portrait comes back with too much heat in the cheeks, the steward asks the workshop to cool the disposition. Next week, you look more saved. There is a debate. You've heard, among men who catalogue women and the women who go on living anyway, did most ladies truly chase this paleness to the edge? Or is the ghostly ideal largely a thing of painted panels and poems aspiration written over reality? Diaries are stingy. Dressing room talk rarely reaches the archive. What remains in ink are prohibitions and purchase lists. Not the moment at midnight, when a woman stares into a mirror, wipes away the day's mask with warm rose water, and sighs as face is hers, and the one she wears separate. The silence is part of the design. If this regime was universally loud, someone could call it cruelty. Keptkie. It is simply the way. You do not complain. You perfect. A real wound would be indecorous. A crafted weakness is chic. The contradiction is breathtaking. if you have breath to spare. The natural look, achieved through manufactured death. The smells of the work are their own liturgy. Vinegar, resin, crushed petals, fat warmed between fingers. Sometimes a fad wafts in from a city, sage rubbed on teeth to sweeten breath, rosemary boiled in wine to cheer the brain and gloss the hair you will later hide. Perfumed gloves arrive from Italy, inner seams stitched with civet. You cradle a psalter, and the room decides you are pious because you smell expensive. There are mercies in the kit. Snails appear, disastrously alive and unexpectedly useful. Their mucin slicks the skin into calm. It will make a fashionable comeback 6 centuries later and be sold under gentler lighting. Now it's just another jar in the box, part miracle, part dare, and because you cannot appear wholly dead, you stage life in sanctioned hints, a touch of berry at the lip, but barely anything darker risks gossip that your mouth talks when it shouldn't, a shadow near the eyes, carefully placed, as if a hymn kept you up late. The aim is a story everyone already believes, that virtue cools the blood, that good women are pale, that class has a colour, and the colour is absence. Everything conspires. The fasting season hands you an alibi for not eating. The priest praises moderation with his eyes on your face. A tapestry in the hall shows a lady the shade of milk in a garden that never rains. You pass beneath it and match the palette. Even your friends help. You look so calm, one says, while counting ribs under velvet with her gaze. Calm minds cold. Cold minds safe. You would like to ask, sometimes, where the heat is supposed to go. It cannot live in the cheeks. It cannot live in the voice. It must not rise as laughter. You learn to carry it in the hands, in the brain, in those stolen minutes after Compline. When you sit barefaced by a window and feel your skin thaw back into you, put the box away. The mask will cure while you sleep. The morning will be kinder to white than to you. Tomorrow, you will choose your angle in the chapel, your seat in the hall, your distance from the fire. You will make the face that opens doors and closes questions. But pallor is only the foundation. The canvas is wrong unless it is vast. The brow must be higher. The eyes must be framed by nothing at all. The skull itself must be persuaded into fashion. You close the lid and hear the faint clink of tweezers within. Tomorrow, we raise the forehead to heaven, one hair at a time. The tweezers are small, silver, and merciless. You hold them like a pen and begin the day's first sentence. Irasi. A hairline is a frontier, and fashion demands annexation. One by one you lift and pluck until the sting becomes a rhythm, until your scalp hums and your brow looks wider, emptier, olier. Vinegar-damped cloth cools the skin. A smear of walnut oil promises the follicles will surrender by tomorrow. If you lack patience, there are harsher concoctions, lime and yellow powder, from the apothecary that bully the roots into retreat. No one says poison, they say depilatory. Tutu, eyebrows go next. Not shaped, banished. A faint shadow may remain, enough to keep the face from floating off the skull. But anything expressive is suspect. The ideal is a smooth, uninterrupted plane from lashes to hairline, a stage for light, a billboard for virtue. People will call this brow intelligent, noble, serene. You will learn the less gentle translation. Harmless. Where did the ideal come from? Paintings preach the gospel as loudly as pulpits. Artists give the Virgin Mary a high, glass-still forehead, thought without appetite, piety without pulse. Court ladies follow the panel as if it were law, and in time, the law follows them back. A forehead's arms race from Paris to Bruges. Look closely at the portraits Van Eyck's wives, Rogier's duchesses, and you can almost count the morning's casualties along their hairlines. Even when the sitter arrives with honest brows, the workshop improves her. A little more height, the lids longer, the mouth tighter at the corners. Your face is corrected into obedience. Headgear conspires with the tweezers. The hen in the storybook. Cone tilts backward to frame the brow like an altarpiece. Calls of gold mesh catch the braided hair and hide it. A wimple or transparent veil softens the edges, so the forehead reads as luminous stone. In France, queens turn starch into architecture. In Burgundy, sleeves and veils become scaffolding for the new geography of the face. You do not merely wear a style, you install it. The maintenance is daily and devout. You pluck at dawn because swelling shows less before wine. You pluck at dusk because daylight's honesty is unkind. You sleep with a strip of linen pressed along the hairline to persuade hesitant follicles to admit defeat. You learn to work past little scabs, to stop before the bright prick of blood, to dab rosewater and pretend the sting is prayer. There are cautionary stories, told with a smile that hides a wince. A Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, they say, plucked so zealously that her headdresses grew higher to hide the patchwork beneath. A court beauty refused to pause through Lent, and spent Easter with a raw, shining brow. No one stops. They only get clever. A dot of ceruse disguised as sanctity here, a fringe of gauze there, and the illusion survives. What the brow deletes, the rest of the face must not replace. Too much cheek reads as appetite, too much lip as invitation. You learn the performance notes, eyelids heavy like a late vigil, mouth closed as a reliquary, smile present but contained, a candle flame inside glass. Laughter is permitted in theory and punished in practice. An open mouth reveals teeth. Teeth are not the point. You practice the soft exhale that looks like amusement in profile and restraint head-on. If you want to see how thoroughly theatre has replaced truth, watch the painter at work. He studies you for an hour and then glances at his own sketchbook patterns. Not people. The ideal brow lives there, standardized like a garment size. He adjusts you toward it. The arch, a fraction higher, the hairline a thumb's breadth back. When the panel dries, you are calmer than you remember being. The portrait hangs in the hall and teaches other women what they must become. Men praise the look as wisdom. Priests praise it as modesty. Women pass each other in passageways and exchange smaller truths. Does it ache? Means, are you starving your face into virtue? You look so serene. Means, I see the work and choose not to name it. Servants learn your threshold. For pain the tug you can take, the stretch you cannot, and become choreographers of stillness. Is the zeal universal? The record is coy. Sumptuary laws care more about silk than brows. Poets exaggerate. Chroniclers notice only what confirms a sermon. Farmers' daughters do not have leisure to pluck themselves into angels. But at court, where signs are coin, the high forehead becomes compulsory punctuation. You might choose not to do it. People also choose exile. Sometimes the body pushes back. Follicles inflame. Little infections pool. The skin peels where vinegar met winter. Physicians prescribe cool poultices and warmer scalding. Too much heat has risen to the head. You think, because I ripped away the hair that kept it. Out loud you say, I will be temperate, and return to your stool tomorrow. The strangest effect is emotional. With the brows erased, expression must move somewhere else. You develop a new grammar with eyelashes, with breath, with the angle of the pupils. Your friends can read it. The untrained cannot. Men decide you are unreadable and call that purity. You discover that being misread can be a kind of shelter. Headwear polices the rest. Married, then veil the hairline. You've worked so hard to sculpt. Unmarried, you may let a suggestion of it gleam under gauze, a sanctioned glimpse of the work beneath the cloth. In summer, starch turns your temple into a kiln. In winter, the linen chills like law. Pins multiply like small threats. You learn to nod without shifting the architecture, to turn a corner without catching your veil on a nail. Entire afternoons vanish into the choreography of not moving. The foreheads grow higher, as if aspiring to heaven by increments of pain. Visible veins become a boast skin, as parchment thin, soul. As script legible from across the choir. Painters trace those pale blue lines with love. Rumour traces them with scorn. Either way, they read, is this vanity? The moralists say yes. You learn the older word that contains it better. Survival. A high brow buys patience from a mother-in-law, deference from a steward, mercy from a bishop with opinions about women who speak quickly. The plucked head enters rooms. The unplucked one cannot. There is a limit even to this. Pluck too far, and the skull looks strange, infantile, uncanny. People cannot name why. They simply look away. You sit back from the edge and let a fine down grow in as a truce. A new fad will arrive soon enough to keep the face busy. A bleach for hair, perhaps. A miniature war against teeth. Fashion is a relay race in which every baton is slightly poisonous. For now, you touch the new geography, cool, taut, a little tender, and relearn your own face without its native punctuation. You set the veil just so. You practice the tiny smile that forgives those who made these rules and spares you from repeating them out loud. Tomorrow, the mirror will move below the brow and into the mouth. The lips must be quieter. The teeth must almost not exist. Perfection, we are told, speaks softly or not at all. Begin where speech begins. The mouth held closed like a secret. You sit before the mirror and rehearse the day's first expression. Not joy, not greeting, but containment, corners lifted a breath, lips sealed, a smile that could pass a bishop without scandal. The lesson is simple and merciless. The most perfect teeth are the ones no one ever sees. In this world, a woman's mouth is a verdict. Small means modest. Quiet means virtuous. Visible teeth mean appetite of one kind or another. So you learn to make your laughter narrow, your amusement private, your delight. An exhale through the nose that never parts the lips. The court calls it refinement. Your jaw calls it work. If the mouth must be small, the teeth must be smaller white, discreet, and shy as moths. The era's poets write the rule into romance. Her teeth so fine, they would not break the skin of a grape. Painters obey. They shorten the mouth, tighten the corners, shade the lips into a line that suggests tenderness without ever risking hunger. When the portrait is done, you look gentler than you remember, and more manageable. There is a routine for making absence. First the cleaning. A cloth, a bowl, a pinch of sharpness. You rub with wine, vinegar, and salt, or with a paste of sage leaves and ash. Some women favor burnt rosemary. Others, ground eggshell. Everything is grit. It works at first. The enamel brightens. The surface smooths. Then the powders ask for payment. Coral dust, brick dust, alabaster scrapes. The smile polishes itself toward ruin. You will not know the price until a winter night, when a cup of hot spiced wine touches a nerve, and the pain flashes like lightning across a field. Breath must whisper virtue too. You chew parsley, fennel, mint little gardens hidden in the cheek. A clove tucked beneath the tongue warms the mouth and buys an hour of civility. There are rinses, rosewater for sweetness, wine with mint for courage, a drop of honey to keep the lips from cracking in dry weather. Nothing truly cures, and everything covers. The point is not health. The point is the story your mouth tells about your soul. No one will say this aloud, so you learn to hear it in the silences. A large laugh is a failure of character. A wide mouth is a sign of forwardness. A woman who shows her teeth shows her intentions. So girls are taught the Mona Lisa trick centuries before there was a Mona Lisa smile with the eyes, not the lips. Smile like a secret you do not intend to share. There are even little drills. Hold a strip of linen between the teeth while practicing conversation. Repeat a psalm without touching the cloth. If the linen falls, so will you socially. At least, still, bodies resist. A joke arrives too suddenly, and your mouth opens of its own bright will. You catch yourself, press the lips together, and swallow the laugh. The room approves. You feel a tiny grief and pretend it is grace. What the manuals can't teach is triage. A blemish on the lip, dab rosewater, and wait. A split at the corner from winter wind. Touch it with a smear of beeswax so the smile does not tear when you need it. Teeth aching but mustn't be seen. Bite a cinnamon stick and breathe as if prayer is delicious. If a tooth loosens, there are men for that, barber surgeons who extract with iron and bravado under a black hood of reputation. They are quick, not gentle. You will hear the story told as comedy in a hall by someone who has never bled into his own hands. Class polisses the mouth as surely as priests do. Peasant women have teeth that live in weather, stained by smoke, rasped by coarse bread, honed by work. They laugh with their whole faces, which is to say, improperly. At court, where signs are coin, you learn to hide even when you are healthy. You are not allowed a mouth that suggests you have ever chewed anything tougher than a confession. There are cosmetics for lips, of course, but they operate like rumors. Best when faint, dangerous when bold, a tint from alkanet, a kiss of pomegranate, a little red leached from wine, and blotted until it reads as nature rather than intention. By daylight you wear nothing at all. By candlelight you risk a breath more colour, trusting the shadows to forgive. Darker stains are for dancers, and for stories told about them. You will admire the courage, and look away. Painters collude in the fiction. A mouth too ready to part. They shorten it, teeth accidentally glimpsed in the sitting. They paint them back behind the lips. Handsome realism has no place on a devotional panel or a wedding portrait. Your descendants will imagine you were born composed, and the truth that you worked at it like penance will dry. With the pigments, the strangest tyranny is joy. Open laughter, the kind that breaks and remakes the face, is treated like a moral risk. You begin to ration it the way you ration bread in a fasting season. A crumb at home with the door closed. A taste in the kitchen when a maid tells something wicked. A swallow saved for the one friend who will not sell you for a sonnet. Joy that shows teeth is too alive for the hall's theology. Meanwhile, the recipes multiply. For whitening, sage rubbed each morning, or a paste of crushed pearls, for those who can afford to grind their inheritance and spit it into a basin. For pain, a poultice of plantain and vinegar, or poppy milk on the gum, until the world goes pleasantly far away. For odour, comfits of anise, the sugar biting back, yes. Sugar, that new merchant's jewel, sweet as favour and just as corrosive. It will have its revenge in centuries. But already there are whispers of mouths that crumble like old plaster under the prettiest breath. There are little acts of rebellion. In some courts, the women pass a tiny pot of balm hand to hand, tinting the mouth in plain sight of the men who pretend not to see. The colour is subtle, the message not, "I am not a statue." In others, a lady lets her mouth widen by a hair's width while listening to a clever man, a movement so small a painter would miss it. It is not permission, it is identification. The body remembers itself in millimeters. Portraits, poems, sermons each edits you toward disappearance. Yet you discover the mouth is sly, even closed. It speaks, held too tight. It declares fear, curved too carefully. Il confesse performance. When you are tired of the pantomime, you let your lips rest in their untrained shape for an afternoon and feel something wild. Your face becoming honest again, the whole map of you shifting by degrees back toward a country you recognize. Later, at table, a story lands harder and funnier than anyone planned. A ripple of laughter runs the length of the board. You press a fist to your mouth and shake in silence. A polite earthquake. Across from you, a girl new to court forgets herself and laughs out loud. For one bright beat, you see the future she risks. The glance from a chaplain, the lifted brow of a dowager, the note in a rival's mind excess. Appetite. Untrained. You do not join the punishment. You widen your eyes in a tiny congratulations and return to the mask. When the candles gutter, you rinse again, mint in wine, vinegar in water, and feel the ache of a day spent biting yourself back. You press beeswax to the corners and promise to be better at obedience tomorrow. Then, just before sleep, you lift a mirror to the lamp and look at your mouth at rest. It is larger than the paintings say, warmer than the poems allow. You say a word into the darkness and hear how alive it is in your own voice. Tomorrow, the discipline will move below the mouth to the appetite itself. If good teeth must not show, a good stomach must not announce its hunger, the body will become a shrine by subtraction thinness, as prayer, fasting as proof. Tonight you swallow the last clove and bank the small defiance of having smiled, where someone might have seen. The lesson travels downward, past the lips you've trained not to open. A good body does not announce its needs. Morning comes with its small cruelties, cold water on the face, the linen shift clinging, the room still smelling of last night's candles, and your maid sets out bread and milk like a dare. You lift your hand, bomb a benediction, and decline. Refinement is a hunger strike, conducted in soft focus. No one calls it that. Of course, they call it devotion, disciplina, delicacy. In a world that equates paleness with purity and quiet with virtue, thinness becomes the next sacrament. You practice absence as performance. At table you arrive on time, take the seat assigned, and play your part at the theatre of food. You finger a crust. You sip watered wine. You let a shred of roasted capon hover politely over your plate, as if happiness might land on it by mistake. The men talk harvests and diplomacy and price of wool. Your task is to be the visible proof that this house breeds restraint. At feasts' high days, when the hall groans with meats and sugared marvels carved into swans and hedgehogs, you perfect the art of almost bite, almost taste, almost swallow. A courtier glances and registers the message you are paid to send without wages. I am above appetite. The compliments arrive in the language of sanctity. You shine tonight, someone says, as if radiance were the product of air and prayer, not emptiness. Later, in the corridor, you hold the stone wall until the corridor stops swaying. It is not only fashion, it is theology with a corset. Suffering has value. Denial redeems. Saints are painted as lovely in their affliction. Heroines glow most when fading. So the women try to be lovely by subtraction, and the subtraction is admired as a kind of music. There are tales that prop the whole illusion upright. Saint Catherine of Siena thin as a candle, bright as one said, to live on nothing but the host. Her body, a wick burning directly toward God. Modern scholars give it a name, anorexia mirabilis, and at a safe distance the term sounds clinical, orderly, almost merciful. Inside the practice, there is nothing orderly about it. There is dizziness and triumph and shame braided together like hair. Contemporaries argue about causes as loudly as we do. Some say noble women fast to imitate holy women. Some say they fast to void themselves of gossip and error. Some say they fast because the hall is a courtroom, and the body is always on trial. A narrow waist is exhibit A. The truth is a mess of motives. Faith, fear, fashion, and the only currency a woman is reliably allowed to mint control. Lacing turns devotion into silhouette. The undergown tightens. The side ties bite. The ribs remember. You stand at a bedpost and exhale while your maid pulls. You inhale and meet the wall of your own clothing. Breath becomes a rationed luxury, like spice or privacy. Gowns follow the script. Long lines, narrow middles, sleeves that droop like sighs. Even when the fabric is velvet and the embroidery gold, the message is monastic. I am contained. You can see it in portraits across a continent. The same flute of a torso, the same controlled rise and fall of the chest. Painters call it style. Your back calls it penance. Is it universal? No. Women who farm, mill, and carry children on their hips cannot afford to be ethereal. They eat to work and work to eat, and no one writes sonnets about their virtue. But among those who live by signals the court, the merchant palaces, the places where a room full of eyes feels like weather, the competition is real. You can taste it in the way friends watch one another's plates, in the flattery that lands like a glove to the face. You have such lightness, someone says, and the compliment is both prize and pressure. There are practices everyone pretends not to notice. Some women chew and discreetly fold the food into napkins. Some nurse a single cup of spiced wine all evening and let the warmth stand in for eating. A few swallow the advice of apothecaries, who promise to quiet the stomach with harmless-sounding simples. You do not ask what else those powders quiet. None of this is confessed, except to a mirror, and even there you tell the story gently, as if gentleness makes it true. The body tells a harsher tale. You sleep cold. Your hands run out of heat by vespers. When you kneel, your head swims. When you rise, a silver fog ripples across your sight. Your monthly cycle slips its schedule or vanishes. The priest calls it spiritual favor. Your bones know subtraction by its more intimate name, and yet the approval tastes heady. You notice how people make way for you, how servants hurry sooner, how men lower their voices, as if loudness might bruise you. The world greets you like a reliquary, an object to be admired and carefully carried and never asked what it wants. Art and instruction books conspire. Tailors cut gowns to exaggerate what discipline has begun. Poets supply metaphors. Snow, alabaster, lilies, smoke. Everything pure is pale and ready to break. It's an aesthetic that bleeds into policy. A girl praised for fasting at 14 becomes a wife, praised for docility at 16, a mother praised for silence at 20. It feels like a ladder, but when you look down, there is no ground, only air held together by other people's expectations. Men sometimes practice versions of the same austerity in monasteries, on campaign, but the accounting differs. A fasting man is iron, a fasting woman is glass. He is admired for fortitude. She is admired for fragility. He is still permitted anger. She earns concern and then control. Eat. Someone tells you in the tone that means obey. If you do, you're scolded for indulgence. If you don't, praised for purity. The trap is elegant. It rewards you whichever way you choose. As long as you choose to be watched, even clothing conspires to make hunger look holy. Tight lacing presses the stomach flat. Layered skirts hide the wobble of weakness. Jewelry distracts. A veil frames a face grown sharper. When the fashion for high, swan-like necks arrives, tailors lengthen the line of your body with seams and darts. And suddenly, even faintness looks like choreography. You begin to understand why fainting couches are placed where guests can see them. There are counter-stories. 2. A stern moralist writes that women starve for vanity and calls it sin. A humanist woman writes back rare, brave, arguing that the real sin is the world's fixation on her body, not her use of it to make a point. A physician observes bones bent by garments and diets, and blames the devil. A midwife notes that the devil gets far too much credit for choices forced by men with ledgers and priests with metaphors. In the archives, silence thick enough to read. Diaries are scarce. Confessions, when they exist, are written to God, who keeps them. At a winter banquet, you discover the precise boundary between performance and collapse. You've eaten 3 mouthfuls in 2 days, and the hall is warm with bodies and braziers. Somewhere between the boar's head and the marchpane swans, the floor tilts. You go light behind the eyes. In the brief, soft theatre that follows you, sink with elegance into a friend's arms. A page runs, a little crowd forms, and you are carried to a side chamber where rosewater is fetched, and faces bend close to admire your saintly pallor. An hour later, your maid feeds you broth behind a screen. You cry, very quietly, because emptiness is lonelier after applause. Do you stop? Sometimes. For a week, you eat bread without bargaining, and feel the world return in colour. Then a remark lands. You look different, and you hear the ellipsis as verdict. You pull the laces a hole tighter the next morning, and convince yourself it's about God again. What does love look like in a system like this? A friend who slips you sugared almonds, and doesn't watch whether you chew. A sister who, in a church where every saint is thin, tells you a story about a sturdy prophet who ate and still met God. A painter whose miracle puts warmth in your cheeks without apology, and refuses to narrow your waist on the panel. A husband who learns the difference between control and care. Sometimes these people exist, often they don't. You learn to be your own witness. Is there rebellion? Yes, but it is careful. You choose an afternoon, and eat an orange in the kitchen with your hands, and you do not hide the joy from the scullery girl who sees you. You tell your maid to loosen the ties before prayer so you can breathe like a person instead of an icon. You stop pretending you don't like stew. These are not revolutions. They are seeds. Night again. The stomach makes its small wolf noises, and you pretend the sound is distant rain. You keep a tiny piece of bread beside the bed, the way a child keeps a charm, and you break it in half and let it dissolve slowly, just to remember that being alive sometimes tastes like something. Tomorrow, the painters will return, and the priests will speak, and the hall will expect you to be the body that proves an argument it invented for you. You will decide, minute by minute, how much of yourself you can afford to give away. The skin will have its own demands, soon complexion as catechism, paint as prayer, poisons smiling from a jar, and you will learn a new discipline, how to survive your own reflection. For now you close your eyes and let hunger hum its old hymn, while sleep, merciful and amoral, finally wins. Here's the script. They hand you and call it virtue. In be married but look untouched. Speak softly, but be understood. Allure without accusation. You are asked to glow like a candle that never had a flame. The costume department supplies the rest hair. Veil, posture, rumor. Hair is the first hazard. Loose hair is weather. Alive, ungoverned, a sign in every painting of appetite and interruption. Brides are permitted it once down the back like a comet, because the ritual insists on the image of innocence about to be contained. After that, hair is a problem to be solved, with pins and cloth. You learn the geography of concealment. Coif, fillet, wimple, linen against the jaw, a veil's edge, smoothing the cheekbones into meekness. Fabric trains the eye to think holiness lives in silence. You feel the heat in summer, the itch in winter, the slight pressure under the chin that renders you legible good. Guarded, presumably safe. Safe is a social fiction built from gossip and law. Alliances hinge on the presumption that your body is a sealed treasury. Inheritances hang from a thread as thin as a rumor. A glance in a garden, a letter intercepted, a waist that changes shape. Each can tilt contracts, cancel dowries, ruin cousins yet unborn. So you are schooled in credible denials and quiet signals. You write notes that say nothing beautifully. You practice serenity like a second language. You become an expert in distance. The length of a nave between you and an interested man, the angle of a head that rebukes without scandal. You learn to survive the phrase, "She seems pure," which is both compliment and leash. The paradox polices your voice. You must be silent enough to soothe, but readable enough to secure. Suitors, bishops, fathers-in-law all need the same visual argument, that your allure is harmless. And your harmlessness alluring, paintus collaborate. You are given the sanctioned face pale, untroubled, a mouth that promises obedience even when it is closed in self-defense. In portrait, you are mother and maiden at once, a child on your arm, a veil on your crown, and no line of flesh that suggests you've ever been touched by either labor or desire. An impossible algebra that still totals to acceptable. Oh, when things go wrong, and they often do in rooms full of locked doors and keys you don't carry there, are tactics. Reputation has its physicians, matrons who know how to smother a story in a week of conspicuous piety, confessors with ears elastic enough to stretch a misstep into a metaphor, tailors who make repentance visible in black wool and high collars. There is the convent, that dim corridor off the great hall of life, sometimes sanctuary, sometimes sentence. A few enter to escape husbands or lawsuits, many to outwait scandal. Inside, you exchange the public veil for a stricter one, and discover that invisibility can feel like both prison and reprieve. There are harsher remedies whispered from apothecaries' back rooms, alum and oak gall infusions to tighten what rumor calls proof, rosewater and myrrh. Rinses for the odor of sin. A cautious midwife with a needle and a story prepared. You know which bundle to buy if your wedding night has the wrong color silence. No one teaches you the names. They arrive folded into the logic of survival. You light candles to the Virgin and to discretion in the same breath. Law gives rumor teeth. One precise note from the ledgers of control. In 1288, Bologna's commune issued an ordinance requiring women registered as prostitutes to mark their bodies with modesty by force, yellow veils, and forbidden finery, under threat of fines and public penalties. The rule is not about virtue, it is about visibility. Who must cover, who may display, who gets punished for looking like a story the city does not approve. The point is clear. Civic order is stitched through what women wear. Your own veil is gentler, but it does the same work. It rebrands you. It says, "If I am seen, let it be as symbol, not as self." You learn the language of fabric, a veil drawn forward to write grief across your face, a layered, milky translucence that nods to Mary without erasing your pulse, the meticulous, pin-by-pin drape that keeps the jawline sacred and the ear unprovocative. In a world where hair is danger, cloth becomes liturgy. The contradictions accumulate like pins in a cushion. You are to be fruitful, and yet visibly untouched, desired, and yet demonstrably safe. Court poetry doubles down. The perfect lady is luminous and inconveniently impossible. All flame, no ash. Preachers ply the same contradiction with holier language. You hear, again and again, that the Virgin Mary is your model, a mother who never learned desire, a wife whose body was a window light passed through without smudge. You are not asked to be her. You are asked to be her picture. Even so, women find margins. A widow keeps the veil, but loosens the pins. Not as flirtation, but as oxygen. A young wife chooses Marion blue because it buys her time to finish sentences. A merchant's daughter with too much laughter in her, for the role negotiates a stint with an aunt in a convent library, where books are kept, and rumour travels slower than in markets. A lady writes her own life in a book of hours, illuminated with small rebellions, a strand of hair escaped, a lip with more colour than approved, a saint who looks unmistakably like a woman who has lived. You become your own censor and your own stage manager. Before a feast, you test two veils in the mirror, one that pleases your mother and one that might let you breathe. At Vespers, you time your gaze downcast enough to perform humility, direct enough to remind a counsellor. You understand the numbers in last quarter's rent roll. In the garden, you keep to the sunlit path when you're watched. In the shade, you let your hairline feel air, and remember you have a skull. Still, the stakes remain medieval, even when you feel modern inside your head. A cousin's inheritance depends on you never being a story. A treaty assumes you are what your veil says you are. You carry the paradox like a reliquary gold on the outside, bone within, and learn to tell yourself that the weight is holy. Some days you believe it, some days you do not. At night, you unpin yourself carefully, the way a clerk closes a ledger. Lean and false, hair breathes. The jaw unfurls its secret ache. You sit with your own face and count, not the days until you fail the picture, but the small victories of impersonation, a rumour turned aside, a promise kept to yourself, a single hour in which you felt like a person and not a proof. Tomorrow the veil will rise again. The paradox will rehearse you into its lines, and you will walk out a married virgin in a room that prefers icons to women. For tonight, you let your hair fall and tell it the oldest story you know. You were not made to be a symbol. You were made to be. They tell you angels are blonde, so you begin to chase heaven with a bowl and a hat. In cities where canals cut the sky into mirrored ribbons, women climb rooftop terraces at noon, set out a chair, and pull on a wide-brimmed straw hat with the crown neatly cut away. Hair is drawn through the opening and spread over the brim like spun straw. The face stays shaded. The strands are offered to the sun. A maid dabs your scalp with the mixture urine for ammonia, alum for fixing, saffron for the glow, sometimes lye from wood ash to strip stubborn pigment. It smells like a stable, blessed with incense. It bites. You sit very still while the light does its slow arithmetic. This is the cult of sanctified blonde, the angelic shade that painters call innocence and poets call dawn. Not honey, not brass, but the candle halo gold that makes a veil look like a cloud. You learn the choreography. Before the hat, you wash with chamomile and vinegar, so the cuticle opens. During, the maid combs through with bone teeth, keeping wetness even so the burn is uniform. After, a rinse with rose water and egg white to seal the damage under a sheen. The hat is technology and theatre. From the street, no one sees your face. Only the ring of hair draped over the brim and the glint where the sun catches it. Neighbours know what you're doing and pretend not to. It is understood. You are not idling. You are manufacturing virtue. Pain stands at the center of fashion like a patient saint. The scalp reddens, the part throbs, the skin at the temples prickles for hours. Days, if the lie was strong. Some women go too far and peel. Some lose hair in flares, like fields burnt in patches. A few blink through tears and decide that holiness can stay brunette. Most return to the chair next week because the promise is powerful. To walk indoors and be mistaken for a stained glass window, gold is not just a color, it is a class. A credible angelic blonde demands privacy, patience, and supplies things that cost. Saffron threads dearer than many spices dissolve into little suns in the bowl. Alum, a strategic dye-house mineral, rides into port under monopoly and papal blessing. Lye must be fresh, the hat new enough that straw doesn't shed into the potion. The recipe is an invoice. Your glow is a ledger entry written in yellow. In the Mediterranean, sunlight becomes a partner and a judge. Women in Naples and Valencia rinse with lemon and salt, then sit against whitewashed walls, so glare bounces back and bleaches twice. On Venetian Altain, those wooden rooftop decks, you time the angle of the lagoon light. An hour for brightening, 2 for the risky promise of Venetian blonde. It is a neighborhood ritual conducted above the city's breath. Laundry lines, gossip, a string of rosary beads clicking somewhere below. The sun is free. The ability to arrange your day around it is not. Poets will help you decide whether the sting was worth it. They split women into 2 shelves, golden innocents and dark temptresses. The first are wheat and honey, team lightning, hair like unspun gold, poured over chaste shoulders. The second are the moon's shadow black silk, storm light, eyes that know more than they should. It's a prejudice dressed as praise, a palette that maps morality onto pigment. The court listens, patrons nod. A lady with raven hair learns to lower her voice and raise her veil. A blonde learns to smile, smaller so innocence doesn't curdle into spectacle. If you want to see golden hair weaponized, read the letters, then open the reliquaries of gossip. Lucrezia Borgia's legendary tresses travel as if they were their own ambassador. Portraits stage them like sunlight captured in netted pearls. Suitors brag about a lock tied in silk. Pietro Bembo keeps a curl with her letters, a private relic that turns a woman into an object you can clasp. Hair becomes a diplomacy of fibers, sending warmth where armies cannot go, binding goodwill more intimately than seals. No treaty bears a strand, but deals thicken when it sits in a locket near the heart. Court life learns to accessorize the myth. Hennins lean back to frame a pale brow and let the new gold pour forward. Fillets are studded with seed pearls to make the color hum. A lady walks slowly at vespers, and candlelight makes a halo. The priests don't disapprove. Even widows permitted to darken and withdraw sometimes keep a narrow band of blonde at the temples, as if remembering the sun without inviting it. Not everyone buys the angel, some buy the shortcut. Tavern remedies promise sun in a bottle, onion skins steeped with alum for brassy lift, sulfur and wine to clarify, stale horse urine for potency. The maid whose job is to fetch that last ingredient learns to hate morning chores. The poor use chamomile and plain soap, then pray for a June with many clear days. When it works, the streaks are uneven patches of hay, swirls of brass. But from across a church, in a dim nave, the suggestion is enough. From a distance, class can be mimicked with a little courage and a lot of sun. The theatre has villains and casualties, bleach blurs, brows, and lashes. If it drips, giving faces the eerie blankness. Painters love, but people misread as shock. Some husbands forbid the practice, calling the smell a public confession. Some fathers insist on it, calling the color a dowry. A girl newly betrothed spends a summer with headaches so that an autumn portrait can be sent to an old man in another city, proof that she is as safe as wheat. You are told this isn't artifice. It's revelation. The sun draws out what God intended, says a pious aunt, who never sits under it. You learn to nod and hold the brim steady. You learn the preventative math, how to part the hair so later breakage hides under veils, how to oil the ends to stop the crackle, how to smile through the smell. You become a chemist of your own allure, repeating a liturgy of measurements with the seriousness of a pharmacist and the faith of a pilgrim. Sometimes, the color refuses your prayers. Hair with iron in it, the deep brunettes of the Levant or Sicily yellows at the edges, and then stalls. A girl with olives in her skin and night in her curls bakes herself sick for a hue she will never own, and the poet who would have adored her as a dark miracle instead writes her as a warning. Sometimes, a fair head darkens with age, and the owner learns how quickly an angel can be recast as an intrigue. The spectrum is a hierarchy, and moving along, it is a social event. There's a second text running under the first. Who gets to be holy? Golden children in tapestries are always safe. Dark women must be supervised by saints. The palette codes race and region. Northern paleness and pale gold become shorthand for virtue. Southern tans and black hair do public relations for sin. It's a map that will outlive the century. You feel it when a priest praises your light, meaning color, and conduct in one syllable. You feel it when a visiting lady from Granada is admired, then filed away as too warm for trust. And yet, there are days the sun forgives the lie, and simply makes something lovely. You climb to the roof, breath, the tar and rope and brine of the city, and let heat unfasten your scalp. Below, a bell counts the quarter hour. Above, swifts carve the air. Your maid murmurs the recipe like a prayer. A cup of rainwater, a spoon of alum, the saffron-like threads of daylight. She is careful. You are brave. For a moment you are not performing innocence. You are simply being gilded by weather. When you come down, the house smells of steeped flowers and bread. Someone will say you look lighter, and mean both shades at once. Someone will complain of the odor and be told to mind his own soul. A cousin will ask for your recipe, and forget to mention that her father has already ordered blue cloth to match your brighter hair. The ledger keeps ticking. In the quiet of your room, you untie the scarf and shake out the strands. The mirror gives you the color story you paid for, yellow in the right places, shine where it counts, a suggestion that heaven might follow you down a hallway. You know the price skin like parchment at the temples, a scalp that protests when combed, a bowl on the roof that will empty and fill all summer. You know the politics, how the shade will open doors and close others, how it will let some men speak to you slowly and make other women sharpen their smiles. You also know the truth that makes the whole ritual bearable. Hair grows. It will darken when you stop. It will remember what it was. It belongs, stubbornly, to your head. You pin it up for supper, and the candle finds it again. This time you decide the glow means nothing, except that a body can be changed and still be yours. Angels can keep their halos. You have a hat and the sun, and a choice. Start with a rule that sounds like a riddle. To be clean, but do not wash. In the moral medicine of the later Middle Ages, hot water is suspicious, steam is dangerous, and a slippery floor means a slippery soul. Physicians warn that bathing opens the pores, letting miasma and misfortune seep in. Confessors warn that bathhouses open something worse. Bodies loosen in warm rooms. Voices carry. Laughter curdles into rumor. So the pious solution hardens into common sense. Keep the body closed. Keep scent, not soap. You learn the workaround, the way you learned your Latin by repetition. The layer that touches skin must be white and honest. Linen, change it often, and you are clean by proxy. Linen drinks sweat, draws grease away like a silent servant, and can be boiled without scandal. Your chemise is the bath you are allowed to wear. Everything else is theatre. Rosewater stands where rivers cannot. A beaked ewer trickles it over your hands. Your pulse points, the tender hollows under ears. It shines for a moment, then vanishes, leaving a ghost of garden. If you must wash the face, you do it with wine and crushed herbs mint to freshen, sage to tighten, a single drop of vinegar to convince the skin to submit. No splashing, no steam, no public confession of pleasure. Cleanliness should whisper. When scent must travel, you give it a carriage. The pomander, a small perforated globe silver, if you are grand. Tin, if you are prudent, packed with resin and spice. Frankincense, to echo church air on feast days, cloves and cinnamon, little warm suns from the Levant. If your purse can bear it, a smear of ambergris, or a tear of musk. So soft it reads as skin. You wear holiness on a chain and call it prudence. Gloves become little chapels for the hands. In certain cours, glove makers will line kid leather with orange peel and lavender, then stitch it shut so your handshake tells a story before you speak. The miracle: you can lift a cup, kneel at mess, or bless a child and carry a subtle weather with you summer in January. A cedar grove in a crowded hall without ever admitting you wanted to smell like anything at all. But the nose is tyrant and the world is work. Sweat finds you and lice find everyone. So you learn the second, darker gospel of clean. Hair is combed with fine bone teeth over a white sheet, so the day's harvest can be seen and killed. Vinegar stands by to stun. Rosemary steeped in wine to cheer the scalp and warm the brain. Bedding is smoked with juniper or bay. A pan of coals under the frame. A slow smolder until the tick squeaks and the room smells like a hillside on fire. The combing is tedious, the smoking acrid, the result only temporary. But by Vespers the head is quiet, and that counts as grace. Public stews, once places to soak and gossip and seal bargains, become battlegrounds. After the great mortality, a preacher's voice carries louder than running water. Lust lives in steam, they say. Disease rides the same cloud. Councils restrict hours, ban mixed bathing, tax the tubs out of reach, or close the doors and praise themselves for saving souls. Some houses survive as dry establishments' food. Cards, whispers, but the hot room goes dark. The city discovers that scandal loves a closed door as much as an open one, but virtue loves a victory lap, and closures look like courage on parchment. Yet even as the bath falls from favour, the church raises an opposite standard, the odour of sanctity. Hagiographers insist that holy bodies alive or dead smell of lilies and spice. As if heaven had a signature, relics exude sweetness in miracle tales. Pilgrims report it between sobs, so the laity aims lower, but in the same direction. A good woman, they decide, should greet you like a garden, never a stable, like a chapelle, never a kitchen. If you do not bathe, you must still be fragrant. If you cannot be fragrant, you must at least be linen. A house arranges itself around the nose. Rushes on the floor are swapped and strewn with thyme, marjoram, and dried rose leaves. Chests hide sachets of orris and violet root among the gowns. The charcoal brazier earns a second life as a censer. The hearth, already an altar for meat, becomes an altar for air. It is cleanliness by architecture. One quick scene before Vespers, because scent loves a schedule. The bell is due at sunset. A maid sets a brass pan on coals and tosses in rosemary. Then bay. The first smoke is sharp, like a scold, then softens to green. Another girl brings warmed rose water in a glazed jug. Mother stands at the table with a little bowl of cloves and bruised mint. She dabs the mixture inside cuffs and along the throat where fabric will meet skin. Your younger brother, fidgeting toward piety, is handed the family pomander and told to swing it twice through the hall to chase the kitchens. A pair of gloves waits on the chair backlined earlier with orange peel and sewn shut, so the leather will release a quiet summer when squeezed. Last, the laundry basket. Fresh linen shifts warmed on the fire guard. You change, not into finery, but into something that has never been dirty. When the bell rings, the house smells like an herb garden after rain. No one has bathed. Everyone is clean. The system has rules and penalties. Overdo it, and you are vain. Underdo it, and you are suspect. Too much musk, and you invite satire. Too much vinegar, and people step away. A tincture of civet on a fast day draws a raised brow. A hint of lavender at a funeral suggests you're comforting yourself a little too enthusiastically. Scent becomes etiquette. You cannot see, but everyone reads. It is also labour. The rosewater must be distilled, the linen bleached, the herbs gathered in their right season. Women carry the work like perfume, invisible unless you step close. A kitchen maid scrubs the flagstones with hot beer to tame a smell no pomander will touch. The laundress staggers home with hands stung raw from lye and river. The lady who glides through the hall has paid for grace 3 times, over coin for spice. Time for linen, skin for vinegar. And she must ignore the itch to preserve the illusion. You learn tricks that feel like spells. A drop of camphor on the comb. Before a long ride, a walnut-sized lump of storax resigned into the corner of a trunk to steady wool against damp. Sage leaves warmed between palms, then passed quickly over hair. Just before entering a room, a slice of lemon hidden in a handkerchief for Lent when you cannot smell like feasts. They are small, domestic sorceries, at once indulgent and defensive. Are there baths? Yes and no. The very rich keep private tubs and heat water discreetly, claiming medical necessity when challenged. New mothers are permitted warm rinses for a few days. Healers argue over how many provided the shutters stay closed. Ailing men take physician-ordered steams with a witness, but the ideal persists. Clean without wetness, fragrant without confession, spotless linen where flesh would be. You move through this world like a lit censer. Smoke there, sweetness here, a trail that says, I was present, without admitting you arrived. Sweating, sometimes you ache for a river, for plunging, for the shock that makes skin ring like metal. Instead, you change your shift and pour rose water over your wrists and pretend your pulse is a spring. When someone praises you, you smell like May. You smile as if God had sent the weather himself. You do not say laundresses, comb, coals, lice. You do not say closed bathhouses or open pores. You do not say rules. You say thank you. Because in this century, a compliment is a little absolution, and absolution is cheaper than hot water. Night comes, the house cools. The brazier is ash, the pomander's breath a memory on the stair. You fold the clean chemise across the chest and lay out tomorrow's linen like a promise. The river will be there in the morning, and you will not go to it. You will be clean anyway. That is the trick. That is the penance. That is the perfume. Open the coffer, and it breathes like a quiet apothecary. Pots, the size of plums. Sticks of rouge wrapped in parchment. A jar whose lid smells faintly of vinegar and rain. Your skincare is a cabinet of small betrayals. First, the white ceruse, white lead ground to silk, and fed with vinegar, until it softens into a cream that spreads like absolution. It hides freckles, sun, sleeplessness, and then, slowly, the skin itself. Wear it today. Tomorrow, you will need more. The mirror-polished bronze. Not yet the watery truth of Venetian glass shows a marvel, a face made innocent. The skull beneath takes notes. Red next, vermilion cinnabar mercury married to sulfur and ground to a pigment so lush it looks edible. You don't eat it. You press it into the living, the lips and the apples of the cheek, to prove you are not a ghost under all that white. It is theatre that stains. Later, when a patch of brown blooms on the temple sun, time, or the lead's revenge, you reach for the nightjar. Spot remover, mercurial again, a corrosive that lifts the mark by lifting the flesh. The scab will require more ceruse. The circle tightens like a ring on a swelling finger. You learn to wrap your sleep. A strip of linen tied under the chin keeps the medicaments where they can work. If dissolving the boundary between skin and story is work. In the morning, the mirror has 2 faces, praise and price. Your complexion has become a ledger, each day paid for with the next. Not everyone can afford ruin in a jar. The countryside attends to faces with recipes that smell like breakfast and garden walls. Yesterday's bread, soaked in goats, milk, and honey, pressed cool on the cheeks. A mash of cucumber and plantain laid over the brow after haying. Snail mucin gathered at dawn. Clear strings, coaxed from crushed shells and diluted with rosewater to persuade tiny wounds to behave. These are not miracles, only mercies. They do no harm, and sometimes a little good softness. Quiet, a night without sting. The city laughs and calls them peasant balms. The city also hides its pitted cheeks behind thicker paint. One ledger line to say the quiet part out loud. Apothecary account. Rue Saint-Honor, Paris. Etienne by Art Blanchett Cerusse. 6 sous the ounce. Vermilion rouge. 18 sous the ounce. Small flask of rosewater. 2 sous. Beeswax and honey together. Bech deniers. Toculas descargot. Gathered by the maid, no charge. The math writes the moral. Lead and mercury are aristocratic vices. Honey and bread are everyone's. Rouge made from crushed cochineal will arrive later by ocean, even dearer. For now, vermilion already separates the painted from the powdered, the grand from the careful. Men adjudicate the mask. Painters smooth your jawline in tempera and call it virtue. If the commission asks, they lengthen the neck and widen the forehead until you look like someone prayers would recognize. Preachers thunder against vanity from pulpits while using your whiteness as a metaphor for purity. Whiter than milk, clean as lilies, as if your face were a liturgy. Courtiers become connoisseurs ivory, not chalk. They will murmur approvingly, or too much red. She bleeds pride. A vocabulary that pretends to be taste, but is only permission and punishment fighting in new clothes. And yet the harshest judge remains the mirror, especially as mirrors improve. In the north, you still hold up hammered metal that returns a soft version of yourself. In Venice, the workshops are learning to lay tin and mercury behind glass, to make a sheet of river that refuses to flatter. The clearer the truth, the thicker the paint. 100 years from now, a woman will set her jaw under a sheet of perfect reflection and realize no human face can live up to a surface this merciless. She will whiten more. Damage is a patient tutor. Lead dries the skin like winter. The skin answers with fissures. The fissures invite infection. Infection means more powder to feign health. Health becomes a rumor your cheeks must tell every hour. Mercury takes a subtler route. Thinning brows, trembling hands, a mind that cannot hold all its thoughts in one basket. But the rouge is so beautiful, and the eye is trained to reward it. In candlelight, you look like a saint removed from her suffering. In sunlight, the lie blinks. The household adjusts to your regimen, as if to a climate. The maid keeps a bowl of rosewater warming by the hearth to take the bite out of the vinegar wash. The laundress learns to coax paint from collars with lie and luck. Your sister-in-law brings stories from the street, a woman fined for excess of ornament, even as the alderman's wife glows like a martyr in a fresco. A friar who condemns rouge then admires a portrait where it has been painted into modesty. You smile, thinly. Everyone is complicit. Everyone is absolved. The alternatives persist at the edges, like hedgerow fruit. A widow keeps bees and swears by a cream of beeswax. Olive oil and honey tacky going on, tender when rubbed away with warm cloth. A shepherd's wife crushes chamomile into a paste and pats it around her eyes after lambing nights. In the market, you exchange recipes the way men exchange wages. A pinch of alum to tighten, barley flour to mattify, a few drops of egg white whisked to a dew that holds the skin steady in August. None of it will make you holy in a painting. All of it will let you sleep. But the cult of white is jealous. Just a touch for feast days. You promise yourself, and in 3 months, the jar lives by the mirror, and the mirror lives in your head. When you bare your face, the world remarks on your tiredness. When you paint it, the world praises your discipline. You are being graded in a language invented by men who don't have to speak it with their bodies. Painters, preachers, poets, they harmonize. Fair equals good. Red equals vitality properly contained. Gloss equals grace. The verdict is old as chalk, and new every morning. There are hazards you cannot display. Your maid learns to lift the lid of the lead pot with a scrap of linen so her skin doesn't split like parchment. You begin to feel a metallic taste when you sweat. Sometimes the rouge stings the way a word can. Once, after a summer processional, your face peels in little moons along the hairline, and the hairline follows the holy forehead, climbs another finger's breadth without plucking. People admire your intelligence. You do not laugh. Then the mirror teaches you kindness. You did not expect. One winter, illness keeps you from the market, and the apothecary, your put runs dry. For a month you use honey and bread and snail and patience. The bruised places along the jaw settle. You catch yourself looking human and feeling relief. Then panic, then something less frightened. When the weather turns, you buy the Blanc again. Of course you do. The world is not built for your bare face, but you use less. The rouge becomes a whisper, not a shout. You begin to know what your skin wants when no one is watching. Still, the theatre calls. On a great feast, candlelight softens the sin of mercury and magnifies the virtue of lead. In the hall, you glow like a promise. A courtier passes and says, "Lady, your complexion is divine." You incline your head and do not tell him about vinegar, or snails, or the ledger where beauty costs more than bread. You do not tell him the mirror sometimes lies and sometimes saves, and that tonight you are both saint and accomplice. Later, alone, you open the coffer and consider every jar as if it could answer back. The white hums, the red sings, the little pot of honey waits like a quiet friend. You have learned the cycle and the exit that isn't one, harm and cover, hurt and praise, poison and prayer. You blow out the candle and feel the ghost of rouge on your mouth, the clean pull of linen on your cheek. In the darkness, the mirror cannot tell you who to be. For a moment, that feels like health. You learn early that frailty can be rehearsed. The mirror teaches you pallor. The pantry teaches you restraint. The garden gives you the pigments of exhaustion. A smear of bruised bilberry or beetroot rubbed softly under the lower lid suggests a night of prayer and weeping. If the tint looks too deliberate, you press the back of a cold spoon there for a count of 20, just enough swelling to turn violet in candlelight, and read as sleepless devotion, not paint, then a breath of rouge, carefully contained. So the face says, "I am bloodless, but alive." It is a choreography of lack. Fainting becomes both punctuation and proof. In the chapel, a woman in a high-backed stall lists at the Gloria, the linen at her jaw trembling like moth wings. Two ladies steady her by the elbows, and the priest's voice softens with pastoral concern. In the hall, a feast's heat, a corseted ribcage, and the scent of musk from 30 bodies crowding the dais. She sways. The pomander at her belt clinks, and a space opens around her like a miracle. A cup of watered wine appears. Someone whispers, "Pious." You learn where the flagstones are friendliest to fall, and which cousins will reach you before your enemies can. The swoon is a sentence you can deploy, not too often, not too hard, or it stops meaning what you need it to mean. Burgundy codifies the style and exports it with its cloth. In the glittering courts of the Valois dukes, where processions unspool, like tapestries and devotions are staged with almost theatrical precision, the look has a name everyone pretends not to use. Holy languor, faces pale as candle wax, eyes shadowed and damp, mouths parted, as if speech itself would be immodest. Ladies sit like well-dressed reliquaries, while the order of the golden fleece clinks past, and the poets learn new adjectives for sweetly suffering. Here, fragility is a public language. The weak voice carries farther than a shout because it obliges the room to lean in. Clothes do half the work. A houppelande cut high below the bust, and belted tight lifts the ribs and shortens the breath. Sleeves fall in rivers that turn hands into ornaments rather than tools. Layers of wool and velvet add the weight that slows a step into a glide. Shoes are soft-soled and narrow, insisting on small, cautious movements that read as grace. A wimple frames the jaw, lengthens the neck, and fixes the head. In an attitude of serene submission, you do not stride, you are born. Even when you walk yourself, the silhouette that results long, narrow, a column of silk. And prayer is less a body than an ideal, dragged through fabric. Not all weakness is costume. Real sickness moves through the same rooms. Winters bring fevers that leave their yellow tinge. Summers bring flux and faintness. Pregnancies come one on the heels of another, with iron that never quite returns to the blood. Fasts begun for holiness bleed into habits the body cannot argue with. And sometimes the swoon is not a performance but an end. Girls who have never eaten enough salt hear bells in their ears and see the floor tilt. Women who have birthed 3 children in 4 years stand up too fast and sit down even faster. The court nods approvingly at the look, while the body learns the cost. You learn, too, to tell the difference. The faint that ends in a soft sigh and lifted lashes, and the faint that needs broth, and a week in bed, because the audience must be managed. The illusion requires caretakers. Maids warm rosewater by the fire to bring life back to a blanched mouth after vespers. An aunt keeps vinegar-soaked cloths in a lidded jar and passes one to your palm before Massa hold it to your nose, if you feel the beating at your temples begin to ring. The laundress starches the inner linen, so the collar will not collapse when you do. A cousin quietly signals when the color has drained too far. That line between admired fragility and alarming truth is thin and policed. The eyes are the stage where fragility works hardest. You cultivate the wet rim and the long blink. There is a trick with a sprig of mint crushed in your fingers. Rub the oil lightly along the lower lid, and it shines like tears without pain. In the afternoon, when sunlight is unkind, you stay indoors and let the dimness do its flattering work. At night, the hall's firelight takes your careful blue shadows and reads them as stories. Vigilant prier, noble grief, the melancholy of someone, too good for appetite. Men call it sensitivity. Women call it a shift that needs letting out, because you cannot quite draw a full breath. The cut of garments amplifies all of this. Bodices are not yet the iron cages they will become in later centuries, but lacing pulls the torso into a long, quiet shape that discourages laughter and appetite alike. The long pendant sleeves make it awkward to raise your arms above the elbow. You learn to keep your gestures low and slow, and people read the economy as elegance. Even the hen in the cone of status tilts the head into a contemplative angle. A body arranged like this begins to feel what it looks like. You learn to be delicate because being anything else is too hard in this much cloth. Meanwhile, painters conspire. They deepen the hollows at the temples and take the red out of cheeks until the face looks like alabaster holding a candle from within. On a good panel you appear half-carved, half-breath, the very image of moderation, untouched by sleep or hunger or the ordinary weather of being alive. Your portrait will explain you even to strangers who never heard you speak. They will think your softness is your nature. They will not know how much of it is engineering, and yet you cannot live entirely in the tableau. The body insists on its own plot. On a feast day, the heat under your velvet climbs. Your heart goes to the door before you do. You close your eyes and let the room gather you. Later, in the cool corridor, a friend presses your wrist and says quietly, "I saw." You laugh, and the laugh is a human thing, not the thin little wind that passes for amusement at table. A word about continuities, brisk and necessary. Centuries from now, another age will sell its own version of this look and call it romantic. The Victorians will cultivate consumptive cheek-hollow cheeks, brilliant eyes, a translucent skin veined like marble, and the painters will oblige with girls who look lit from a fever they are proud to die of. There will be arsenic wafers and vinegar sodas. There will be poems that praise coughs for their blush. Your berry shadow and spoon swelling will look like their rose-cold baths and hour-long mirror practice. Different jars, same grammar, sanctify the symptom, aestheticize the lack, make illness a filter through which beauty becomes legible to power. Back here, in this century of wool and whispered prayer, you return to your chamber and take stock. You wash away the fruit-sad shadows from under your eyes and discover, with a brief shock, that the face beneath them is not unlovely. You try 3 deep breaths in a row without lacing and laugh at the foolery of it. Tomorrow you will fast a little in public and eat a little in private. You will let the sleeves carry your hands. If the room needs a swoon to keep order, you will consider lending it one. But tonight you will drink warm broth, rub rosemary into your temples, and sleep not like a saint, but like a tired person who has learnt that glamour and harm share a chalice, and that you can sip without draining it. In the morning the mirror will ask for your part. The hall will demand your softness. Burgundy will insist you glow like a suffering relic that learned to dance. You will oblige. A little. You will not confuse the script with your pulse. And on the day your knees bend for real, it will not be for applause. It will be because your body said enough, and you listened. The court may admire most the woman who looks closest to vanishing. You, who have rehearsed disappearance, will keep the trick, and not the ending. The mirror isn't kinder to men. It's simply plated in armor. Court demands its own brand of radiance from them: polished steel, polished verse, polished self. The male beauty script is a choreography of edges and gestures, the line of the hairline, the shine on a spur. The bow's angle held a heartbeat too long. If a lady is required to vanish into silk, a gentleman is asked to gleam through it, visible, legible, controlled. Grooming starts with subtraction. The barber surgeon sets out his small arsenal razor, tweetus, pumice, a paste of lime and orpiment, best kept away from eyes and pride alike. Brows are trimmed, stray plucked, and where fashion demands the hairline is nibbled backward to open. The brow, the same high, clean forehead, that signals breeding on women, signaling intellect on men. Vinegar rinses scour the skin. A dab of rosemary oil suggests freshness. A slice of lemon rubbed on the hands eats away at callous and past mistakes. The ideal face is smooth, decisive, a profile that could cut parchment, a jaw that speaks in straight lines. Not every man is born with one. That is why mirrors exist. Clothes refine the outline. First go the linen braise and shirt, soft and white, then the hose too long, clinging stockings tugged high, and fastened with points to the doublet so they don't puddle at the knee in the middle of a bow. The doublet itself is laced snug. It tidies the torso into a neat, believable cylinder. In later years, the codpiece swells from afterthought to punctuation, a padded parenthesis that announces the wearer's prosperity and nerve. Colors are declarations: wine, azzurre. Leaf and fabrics are arguments. A silk lining that no one sees still tells on you. Shoes are cut close to the foot, clever little knives of leather that make ankles look articulate. A belt pulls it all together. A dagger says, "I am ornamental until I'm not." Movement completes the portrait. The court teaches two dances, the saddle and the hall. In the morning, a man rehearses posture in the stable, shoulders squared under weight, knees easy, wrist light on the rein, so the horse carries him like a sentence that knows where it's going. In the evening, he glides through a carol or a bass dance, steps small and definite, hands hovering inches from a lady's sleeve, close enough to suggest mastery, far enough to deny appetite. Beauty, for him, is a grammar of restraint, the spur that doesn't clink, the cape that lifts a precise inch on a turn, the smile that never widens into hunger. Chivalry then writes glosses on the body. Courtly love half-sermon. Half-game teaches young men to house their storms in rhyme. Feeling is permitted, even demanded, but only if it's well-dressed. Sonnets laced tighter than doublets. Sighs released on schedule. Pain is proof. Patience is polish. A knight may bleed, but he does it without the mess of anger. E mai adore, but always from an appropriate distance, so that the architecture of rank and virtue remains intact. Across the room, ladies read the sheen on his boots, and the order of his gestures like scripture. And there, inside the glass case of expectation, stands Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince's perfect exhibit, cautionary label. At 16, he rides into Crossy armoured like a promise, and comes out burnished with legend. Later, at Poitiers, he captures a king, and feeds a continent's appetite for stories. He is what young men practice in front of borrowed mirrors. The straight seat, the lifted chin, the courteous violence. He gathers orders and oriflammes. He is stitched into tapestries where his profile is as clear as a commandment. Yet the body under the pageant has its private text. The long illness that eats him slowly, the heir who never ascends, the effigy in Canterbury, with visor raised, young forever because he died in time. The ideal writes its own tragedy in him, as ideals tend to do. Not all imperfections can be trained away. So, fashion hands out bandages. In some courts, where mirrors multiply like rumors men, borrow a trick that will later belong to another century, small silk patches to cover razor nicks, pox pits, and unkooperative mole, placed just so near the eye or cheek, they flirt with symbolism. Am I audacious or wounded? Both, the patch replies, and therefore interesting. A dab of powder on a too shiny brow, a touch of rose cordial to the lips before a recitation. Nothing vulgar, everything deniable. The page to Squire Morning is a little theatre of becoming, before dawn, a boy with hands still blushed by sleep pads, to the armory to wake bronze and steel. He rubs the mail shirt with sand and oil until it stops smelling like yesterday's sweat and starts smelling like tomorrow's story. In the chamber, he lays out the kit with a priest's care. Linen brace folded, shirt warmed by the fire, hose stretched on the bench so they pull smooth, doublet open, point dangling like little comets, belt, purse, dagger, gloves. The small things that make a man look finished. For service days, gambeson, then mail, then the surcoat with its bright live perfection. On the stool, the cap and croix. By the door, boots softened with fat. On the peg, spurs bright as a promise. The squire arrives, yawning like someone who has already had his first bruises. The page helps him dress. Shirt, hose, doublet, lacing, belt. He cleans under the squire's nails with a strip of linen, oils the hair into obedient waves, takes the pumice to a rough cheek. If there's a scrape, he knows which side to part the hair so it disappears. He threads the points through slashed sleeves, tug, until they sit right, then steps back. The man in the mirror is taller than the boy who began. The costume has added inches, the spine must now defend. They practice a bow, they practice a smile, they practice not showing the effort. After breakfast, the body is tested against its own polish. On the tilt yard, the squire learns to hold a lance without clenching his teeth. In the mews, he learns gentleness from a falcon that forgives nothing. In the chapel, he learns how quiet to make his pride. Sweat happens. Of course, no amount of rosemary water keeps it from the small of the back, but servants know the second ritual, the swift repair, a new collar, a fresh cap, the merest trace of civet, to turn labour into a lure. When he steps into the hall again, no one must be able to tell which of his glories was rehearsed. The script punishes deviation. Too much lace, and a man becomes a peacock. Too broad a codpiece, and he's a joke with legs. Too much scent, and the bishop smiles, the smile that cancels futures. On the other side, rough hands, ragged beard, mud on the hem. These read as failure to belong. Beauty is a gate with a lock you're expected to carry in your pocket. If a lady must not eat, a gentleman must not sweat. He will, of course, do both. He must simply make the evidence decorative. Beneath the lacquer there is, sometimes, a person. The Black Prince learned that lesson under a weight no mirror can show. Others learn it when the practice tilts into parody. A young lord who spends an hour on his curls and another on his horses discovers that grief ignores both and sits where it pleases. A veteran who can dance a bass, dance like a leaf falling, finds that his hand shakes when he lifts a cup. Court will always prefer the gleam. It is easier to applaud. But outside, in the training field after sundown, men look like themselves. Hose spattered, hairline unplucked, shirt half unlaced to let air into the ribs. They sit on a low wall and pass a skin of wine back and forth, laughing the kind of laugh that throws the head, not the measured exhale of the hall. One of them recites a verse he actually means. Another loosens his spur and stares at the moon like an honest fool. The page from morning carries out a basin and a cloth and watches the moon get caught in water. For a moment, the mirror is kind. Tomorrow the glass case will be slid back over them. They will gleam. They will bow. They will ride as if painted. The court will read their bodies like bright manuscripts, and the men will try to keep their handwriting steady. Beauty will do what beauty always does, open doors. Shorten tempers. Sell virtues wholesale. But some of them will remember that the rider comes before the saddle, the breath before the line. the pulse before the poem, and they will keep that truth tucked like a patch inside the glove where no one sees it and where it saves their skin. Before whales lend their bones to fashion, and busks turn torsos into rulers, the medieval body is already being negotiated into shape with linen, laces, and quiet choreography. The ritual begins at skin level, a fresh-washed shift soft, plain, the only kind thing you'll wear all day pulled over your head while your maid warms your kirtle by the fire so the cloth doesn't bite. The kirtle that fitted under gown that does the real work waits with its eyelets gaping like a second. Stricter ribcage. Its stiffening is modest but insistent. Reeds slipped into channels along the front. Waist silk pressed into a firmer panel. A sliver of horn hidden, where posture gives up first. In richer wardrobes the bones are costlier baleen. If the trade has been good, slivers of worked whalebone smoothed until they gleam like rules for living. You step in, the lacing begins. Side lacing whispers discretion. Front lacing announces self-sufficiency. Back lacing requires attendance, and therefore advertises rank. Your household has chosen back lacing. You brace palms against the bedpost, while your maid counts under her breath 1, 2, breathe threading the cord in tidy crosses. The first pull is a correction. The second erases breakfast. By the third you remember to exhale before she tightens, so your lungs don't learn resentment. The fabric migrates, climbing the body until the bust is hoisted into compliance, and the waist is teased smaller than honesty. It is not yet a corset, but it has ambitions. The kirtle nips and smooths you into the right silhouette for piety and politics. Long, narrow, contained, over it comes the coat or gown, the part the world is permitted to admire. Its sleeves have been cut to a generosity you cannot earn with breath. They trail, they trumpet, they declare. The skirt drops heavy from the hips, in folds that behave like law. If the day is formal, the lining is fur, the hem is faced. The train is a sentence that must be carried by other people. The garment's weight is not just fabric, it is purpose. Once the girdle is buckled and the neckline pinned, you are an idea. The idea can glide. It cannot bend. In public, tightness is a theology. A procession requires more inches of lacing than a luncheon. A royal entry demands a waist that argues destiny. The vigil at a shrine asks for stillness that comes easiest when movement is simply not an option. Draw it. You tell the maid for the cathedral service, and she does, until your breath becomes a polite guest in your own lungs. At table you learn the new geometry perch. Do not sit. Turn from the pelvis, not the waist. Lift from the elbow, not the shoulder. If you drop a ring, you do not stoop. A girl trained to anticipate your gravity lifts it before it hits the rushes. You are not allowed to be clumsy because the gown has made clumsiness inevitable. The court will call this elegance. In private, the screws loosen by degrees. A chamber concert allows a finger's width of mercy. An afternoon at embroidery steals another eyelet of air. Nursing a child earns you 3. The same maid who made you a column can make you a person again with 6 good tugs. In the mirror, the difference is a rumor. Inside your ribs, it is revolution. You tell yourself this isn't vanity. It's engineering. You are an inhabitant of a shape that was chosen, fitted, reinforced, and if the company is right, relaxed. The Duchess of Berry's household knows this dance down to the minute. Her wardrobe accounts are a choreography of constraint and release. Morning mass gowns set out with the side-laced kirtle for quick changes. Midday audience kirtle with the firmer front panel to hold a posture that lectures without words. Hunting dress with split skirts and looser lacing. Practical, though men will still remark on the line of her back. Evening velvet with an inner layer that is less garment than architecture. Ladies in waiting move around her like skilled riggers, one counting eyelets, one managing pins, one smoothing the seams with flat, practiced palms. The Duchess has learned where to ask for breath distant from doors, near the fire. So conversation covers the sounds of releaser and where to tighten until virtue looks carved. Nothing is accidental. Even compassion is measured. If a petitioning widow is announced, the Duchess signals for a softer bodice. Pity reads more credibly when the fabric allows the chest to rise. The materials preach agency in one tone and deny it in another. Reed seems gentle until you try to laugh. Horn looks minor until it sits exactly where the lungs open. Whalebone doesn't shout. It asserts. Once sewn into channels, these small domestic tyrants ask the body to cooperate with an image that belongs to dynasty, to theology, to taste committees of men with rings who never had to lace anything but words. The constriction is not only physical, the clothes teach your gestures, declaw your stride, edit your appetite. The garment is the tutor. You are the handwriting. You learn tricks. Powder under the arms before the kirtle goes on, or the salt crystals will rub like punishment. A thread loop sewn inside the skirt to hook to your finger, so stairs don't turn you into a parable. A fold of linen tucked at the sternum to soften the press of a too zealous stiffener, always lace from the middle. One older lady instructs, so the strain distributes like diplomacy. Your maid learns tricks. 2. She warms the laces, so they flex. She times the last pulls to the church bells, so the ache feels holy. She carries a little vial of vinegar for fainting yours, or someone else's, in case the air in a crowded hall turns into cloth. Clothes alter reputation. A woman whose laces are always too loose is read as slack in more than silhouette. A woman who courts the smallest possible waist learns that admiration curdles into suspicion. Vanity, says one mouth. Witchcraft, says another. When the shape refuses to yield to age, there are girls who lace for hunger rather than for line, and are praised for both. There are women who refuse the last 2 eyelets and never say why. The garment is a referendum conducted daily. Everyone votes with their eyes. The hour-long squeeze is not only at the beginning, it repeats in intervals whenever the public requires the fiction to hold, but there is always that final scene. The one paintings never show. Night. Pins plucked like stars from a private sky. The girdle unhooked. Its little clink. The smallest freedom bell. The gown shrugged to a chair with the sigh of heavy silk, remembering it is just thread. You turn to the bedpost, because habit is gravity. The maid's fingers work the laces. Slow at first because skin has grown around the decisions made at noon. Cord hisses through eyelets. With each cross unmade, sensation returns colour. Warmth. The startled rush of a ribcage, expanding like a field after rain. The welted lines the reed left along your sternum rise in relief. You touch them as if reading a story through your skin. Your breath breaks into laughter you didn't know you were storing. The kirtle loosens enough that you can roll your shoulders and hear the small bones approve. When the last knot frees, the garment peels away with a sound like a page turned. You stand in your shift, light as a secret, and the cool of the room moves across your belly like a benediction. Then memory arrives, the afternoon's audience, where a lord spoke to your bodice instead of your face, thinking himself discreet. The staircase you descended sideways because a straight step would have been mutiny. The way your son pressed his cheek to the hard front of you and looked briefly puzzled before adapting, as children do, to the costume adults require. All day the fabric spoke for you. All night your body answers back in quiet proofs, ribs widening, bulls escalming, muscles unknotting beneath linen that doesn't argue. You tell yourself you could sleep standing now, that gravity is friendly again. Tomorrow the ritual will repeat, the shift will forgive, the kirtle will correct, the gown will legislate, weight will resume its office on your hips, laces will make their soft, purposeful music. You will become, once more, the line drawing someone else designed, but for the length of a candle stub, you belong to your own breath. You run a fingertip over the faint grooves. The reeds have left, and imagine taking a knife to the channels, tugging every little tyrant out by the root, braiding them into a whip, or into nothing. You will not. You are too well trained, too well loved by people who love the silhouette. Instead, you fold the kirtle with a tenderness it has not earned and set it by the fire, where all obedient things go to rest. The mirror keeps your secret. It shows a figure that can still expand. The maid folds the laces into her palm like a promise, and snuffs the candle. Darkness unlaces further. The last thing you feel is the ache leaving. Slowly, as if reluctant to admit it ever lived here. The smallest stage takes the fiercest scrutiny. In a world that reads morals from cheekbones and salvation from skin tone, the mouth becomes a telegram. Everyone feels qualified to open. It speaks even when closed. A small mouth signals discipline, hunger mastered, words leashed, desire postponed to a holier ledger. A fuller one, lush or merely unfortunate, reads as appetite, for food, for laughter, for argument, for anything too worldly to look good under stained glass. So you learn to sculpt not just the face, but the silence. Color is peril. In daylight, a bold red is almost a confession. It names the mouth too clearly, turns the threshold of speech into a banner for lust, and lets a priest point from pulpit to pew with satisfying simplicity. Painted lips, painted soul. Yet night has different rules. Candlelight forgives. In the hour before Vespers, you crush alkanet or madder root into a little pot of goose fat and wine lees, warm it in your palms, and test it on the inside of your wrist. Too vivid, and you'll look like a tavern story. Too pale, and you'll look like a relic. The trick is blot and layer, a whisper of stain, a press of linen, another whisper. You powder lightly, then touch just the bow again, so in the flicker of the hall, your mouth reads as warm rather than wanting. The aim is to make color appear accidental, as if God put it there, and you merely refrained from getting in his way. There's technique to shrinking the message. Ladies are taught to rest the lips together rather than purse them. Pursing offends, suggests a private disapproval, while soft pressure of the tongue against the back teeth keeps the mouth narrow. Smile with the eyes, if you must. Let the lips move as little as possible. A seamstress can take in a bodice. Only practice can take in a mouth. Mothers teach daughters the resting expression of blamelessness. Corners relaxed, upper lip slightly shadowed by the veil. A composure that says, I keep my own counsel, and therefore can be trusted with yours. The apothecary is complicit. He sells rose pomatum, perfumed enough to seem devotional, a balm tied to prayer. Apply at Compline for softness, at Matins for modest sheen. He knows which ladies want Brazilwood tincture cut with milk, so it dries to a pink fit for daylight, and which want a red that shows itself only when a man leans too close to hear a secret. He knows, too, who asks for a lum to tighten the skin around the mouth. A crude rehearsal for chastity. He writes none of this down. The ledger calls everything unguent. Outside the shop, the voice of condemnation is frank. Mendicant preachers rail against fucus, the false colour that deceives the eye and inflames the ear. Confessor manuals list detraction and idle chatter among the sins of the tongue. Painted lips, they suggest, are the throat clearing before the sermon of scandal. Labia facata, says one like a diagnosis. The implication is arithmetic. If the mouth lies about its hue, it will lie about other things. Moralists braid paint and speech into a single threat. The woman who beautifies her lips will weaponize them. The line between rouge and rumour is the width of a hair. Courtiers don't quote sermons. They read portraits. In a world where distance often courts marriage, the mouth travels by courier. Here is the micro moment, no prayer book records. A princess in the north sits for a miniature good vellum. Careful hand. The painter gives her the fashionable smallness, a modest crescent, colour like the inside of an apple. The likeness is sent south with the usual compliments. Somewhere between Dijon and Zaragoza, a rival courtier commissions a second copy for clarity, and the mouth arrives different, fuller, gleaming, the bow made fractionally deeper, the lower lip smudged as if fevered. Nothing else changes. The hair is the same, the eyes demure, the gown, a sermon in blue, but the mouth shifts the tail. A grandmother in the receiving court frowns, remembers a proverb about butter-soft lips and butter-soft morals, and advises delay. Négociation coule. Months later, an envoy mutters at an inn. It was the mouth, and the innkeeper nods as if anatomy were policy. You learn to perform innocence without parody. Evening stains are for rooms where candles blur evidence, and men call themselves poets. Morning lips must look as if they were washed with milk. The blotting cloth soft linen, used only for the mouth hides in your sleeve. You touch it there like a talisman, drawing away. Gloss between psalms and soup. Some courts even keep an etiquette of hour and hue. A faint berry is conceded at banquets, never at councils. A bare mouth for funerals, unless you are a widow young enough to invite commentary, in which case balm only, and that discreetly. A painted woman at a funeral is a headline. A dry-lipped woman at a betrothal is a rumor. The code reaches beyond color to shape. Miniaturists know to shorten the vertical of the upper lip and soften the philtrum. Sculptors file back the edges of stone mouths to keep them from suggesting talk. In manuscript borders, allegorical vice gets full lips. Virtues are fine and compressed. An ink instruction to tuck the self away. At court, a small mouth is praised as refined, a word that means both pure and processed. The full-lipped girl learns to keep a fingertip at the corner of her mouth when she laughs, a gesture that reads as delicacy, but is really self-defense. Without it, a laugh becomes evidence. The clergy's complaints aren't just about temptation. They're about jurisdiction. Speech belongs to fathers, confessors, princes. A painted mouth looks like a rival pulpit. When a bishop thunders against scarlet mouths, he imagines not kisses but sentences, not seduction but argument. Women's speech is already fenced by custom speak when spoken to. Speak low, speak gently. Paint turns the fence into a ladder. Better to ban the ladder than ask whether the fence is just. Not all paint is provocation. In quieter households, the ladies pass a little pot of pomegranate balm at the end of supper, a domestic sacrament. Each taps the colour twice, blots once, and the talk after grows companionable rather than sharp. A daughter, newly betrothed, practices her evening mouth under her mother's eye. One layer more than daytime, softened with flour dusting at the edges, so it can't be accused of trying. These are the unrecorded catechisms, the careful ways women teach one another to walk the razor that separates allure from accusation. And yet the trap holds. If your mouth is too pale, cruel tongues say the blood doesn't reach you frigid, unkind, cold wife material. If it is too warm, they say it reaches too readily. Either report can become policy. An aunt will whisper to a matchmaker. A steward will shade a letter to a patron. A portraitist will obey a brief that edits your future by a hair's breadth of pigment. Men will claim they decide with their heads, while citing impressions that lived for a second on your lips. You find resistances small enough to pass inspection. On saints' days you leave the balm untouched. Let the linen of your wimple dull, even the natural pink, until your mouth looks like vows. On feast nights, when music unties people, you use the old trick, dab the stain, then drink a sip of watered wine, and press the cup's rim to the lips, so colour blurs to something lived in rather than painted on. Let the evidence be domestic, plausible, and when you must speak sharply because the steward has lied about the accounts, because your sister deserves a defence, you keep the voice low and the tone warm, so the rebuke arrives dressed like a kindness. The mouth is the messenger. You dress it for its errands. In the mirror, the line between prudence and self-erasure is as thin as a lip brush. You have seen women who take it to ghosthood, lips bleached with powder until they vanish, speech dwindled to murmurs, a life lived between teeth. You have seen others walk into rooms with their mouths bright and wide, swallow the first wave of scandal, and ride the second into legend. Most of you live in the middle, a stain that reads as health, a sighs that reads as safety, a silence that does not quite let the words die. Tonight, the pot is in your hand again. The hearth throws a soft gold on the glass of the mirror. The maid waits with the blotting cloth. You touch the balm, twice, and then on something like a dare, choose to leave the edges a breath less perfect than usual. A mortal mouth, not an icon's. You press your lips together. I feel the colour warm into you, and practice the most dangerous thing a medieval woman can, saying precisely what you mean when the moment comes, and letting the painted mouth carry the blame. The exchange rate is fixed long before you learn to count. Beauty buys credit. Credit buys virtue. Virtue buys safety. The arithmetic is everywhere. Abale, Unfreckled face means God smiles on your house. A small, still mouth means your soul knows how to obey. A soft hand, palms white as bread, means you are far from the soil, and therefore near to heaven. Even gait is an account book. The careful glide, the downward eyes, the measured steps that never hurry each, is a ledger line. Proof that your body spends no coin on labor, only on grace. A woman who moves like a lily is presumed to be one. A woman who moves like a wheelbarrow is presumed to be something less. Clergy teach the logic from pulpits and pictures. Painters load the Virgin's mantle with ultramarine and leave the peasant mother in humble ochres. Theologians braid words until beautiful and good sit close enough to share a cup. The moral syllogism is tidy. God is order. Order is beauty. Thus the beautifully ordered face announces a well-ordered soul. In that light, freckles can look like misdemeanors. Strong forearms like a confession. You don't argue with a syllogism, you wear it, and hope it fits. At Poitiers, Eleanor of Aquitaine turns this accounting into theatre. Whatever scholars make of those fabled courts of love, there is no debate about the curation. She orchestrates entrances the way a captain sets a sail silks, that murmur rank, sleeves that spell prosperity. The manners so polished, they reflect the candlelight back as policy. Troubadours praise hair like sunlight and hands like ivory. The room nods, and suddenly sunlight and ivory feel like legislation. Her courtly scriptliness doesn't abolish the equation, it professionalizes it. A woman's posture becomes a petition. A man's bow, a receipt. Walk a mile outside the walls, and the arithmetic changes, while the judgment does not. Peasant women sling buckets, trade babies from hip to hip, and laugh with their whole mouths, because time is a beast that only yields to noise. Their hands are cracked, their cheeks are cider sweet with wind. They do not glide, they move. Yet when they come to town on market day, the same equation tallies them at a loss. Too much colour, too much stride, too much evidence of being alive. The moral economy still prefers a body that spends nothing, and so it discounts bodies that pay for everyone. The court learns to read bodies as credit reports. A narrow waist suggests temperance, a smooth brow, patience, rings and brocade, providence rewarded. Even sans participate. Rosewater means reverence. Woodsmoke means work. Sumptuary rules add lines to the balance sheet fur, reserved for those nearest to God. Pearls, a sort of portable sermon. If you look like a benefice, you must be one. If you don't, beware of being assessed like a tax. Christine de Pizan walks into this and overturns the counting table with a quill. In her city of ladies, she stockpiles lives instead of cheekbones. Queens who govern well, widows who defend towns, saints whose courage is bone, not pigment. Judge us by our deeds, she says, not our faces. She builds a citadel where the account books record works instead of waistlines, a ledger of governance, fidelity, craft, counsel. Each chapter is a credit entry against a long history of aesthetic audits. It does not end the inspections, but it changes what the honest eye can see, and yet the market of faces keeps doing brisk business, fed by rumor. The way granaries are fed by grain, here is your sharp case note. The kind that ruins a season. In late medieval Castile, a young gentlewoman develops a rash across her jaw after a winter fever. It fades in a fortnight. The talk does not. A rival aunt whispers, Malacil. Then, mal de ojo. Then once Bruja. A proposed match cools without explanation. A chaplain's homily on outward stains lands with exquisite accuracy. No one says the word witch in a letter. They do not have to. The arithmetic is done by glances. A blemish becomes a story, becomes a verdict, becomes a closed door. Weeks later, the rash is gone. The ledger entry remains. The stakes are not abstract. Beauty buys time at the table where decisions are made. A face that pleases is allowed to advise. A body that confirms the script is invited to stay when the real talk begins. Conversely, a woman who falls out of the moral picture too brown, too scarred, too loud, too tired, watches the world move around her as if she were a pillar. She learns to borrow credit, to dress her hands in gloves, her walk in smaller steps, her speech in linen. She trains her body to say what her deeds cannot get a hearing to argue. It is tempting to call the whole thing shallow, but shallow economies go broke quickly, and this one endures because it is useful. Beauty is how power makes quick decisions about who may speak, marry, inherit, appear. It is a shortcut dressed as a principle, a sorting mechanism disguised as devotion. Eleanor understands it, and so she scripts it. Christine understands it, and so she writes against it. Most women navigate between them, praying for a day when the books are audited and the column that reads grace is retitled work. If you are clever, you learn exchange rates. You let the veil say virtue, while your hands keep the accounts. You accept a Pearl's sermon and use it to fund the thing the sermon says you do not need. You smile, the small smile that passes, and then, when the door closes, you do the deed Christine would record. The moral economy keeps its ink, but the ledger of memory gains a page, and still, on some mornings, you want to shatter the abacus. You want to walk into the market with wind-burned cheeks and hair that smells of bread, and be read as trustworthy because your grain is clean and your measure honest. You want the theologian to consider that perhaps God loves wrinkled palms and work-strong backs and mouths that laugh like bells. You want Eleanor's Hall to applaud a woman who does not glide. You want Christine's City to be the capital, not the refuge. Until then, you live under the arithmetic and try to change the math. By living, you teach your daughter how to read a gaze the way you read a price, and how to convert her merits into coin. No one can confiscate. You tell her the story of the Castilian rash as a caution about rumour, and the story of Christine as a promise about record-keeping. And when she asks why a soft hand should count for more than a steadfast one, you say, it shouldn't. Then you take her hand soft today, strong tomorrow, and go do something that will make even a hostile ledger write itself in your favour. Be elegant, but not too elegant. That is the rule stitched into every hem. The state wants order. The church wants modesty. Husbands want thrift. Merchants want sales. And women are left to walk a fault line where a ribbon too bright can be read as treasonous optimism. Sumptuary laws, those long, bossy inventories of what you may wear, and in what amount are the state's favourite instrument for turning taste into discipline. They are also a stagecraft of humiliation. Start with fur, the alphabet of rank you can read with your eyes closed. Ermine belongs to queens, sable to the great, marten and vair to the high middling, lamb and rabbit to those who must stay grateful. A law will specify sleeve linings, hood borders, the width of fur facings, as if virtue could be measured in inches. Gold and silver thread are not decoration but jurisdiction. The cloth of gold becomes a border crossing. You cannot legally pass. Metals glitter as a form of passport control. Your waist is inspected like a city gate. Then come dyes. The spectrum turned into a hierarchy. Tyrian tones, born of crushed murex and imperial habit, remain the dream colour that laws keep out of reach. You will have madder red if you must. Kerms. Scarlet. If your purse and pedigree stretch. Woad blue. If you can afford patience but not lapis. Ultramarine. Ground from a stone that crossed mountains and seas, is so dear, it mostly lives on panels in chapels. If your gown hints at that heaven-saturated blue, a clerk may ask, who signed your permission for the sky, and lace easily the most treacherous snowfall to fall on a woman's sleeve. Not just whether you may wear it, but how much, how wide, how many rows, and whether the threads include forbidden metals. It looks like frost, but to the wrong eye, it looks like fraud. In the ledger of appearances, lace is a decimal point where reputations are rounded up or fined down. Enforcement is not theory. It has hands. In some cities, the penalty is a purse-lightening lecture. In others, it is public correction. Quick and cutting. Story after story circulates of officials ordering a woman's gown unlaced in a market square, so that a forbidden fur collar or too long train can be removed. A gold-chased girdle unclasped from a waist that shakes whether with cold, rage, or shame no one records. A tailor dragged before a council and made to snip away the silver bobbin work he spent weeks perfecting. The law says it is the garment on trial. The crowd knows it is the woman. 2 case notes. Anchor the rumour mill. Venice first. A magistrate, one of the Justicieri alle Pompe, guardians of display fines. A merchant's wife, when they discover pearls not on her sleeves but inside them, stitched to the lining, where only she and her conscience would see. Hidden luxury, the court rules, still fattens the sin of pride. The pearls are cut out, the fine recorded, and the city sighs contentedly, as if morality had been laundered along with the linen. Then London, during the lace wars that pit royal proclamations and city officers against haberdashers and silk women, commissioners patrol Cheapside, with the zeal of reformers and the hands of snippers, trimming superfluous gold and silver lace from bodices and ruffs, raiding booths for contraband bobbin work imported against orders. The merchants protest this is livelihood, not license, and the city replies that excess is a public disorder, that a cuff too rich can incite the kind of envy that topples order. For every proclamation, a workaround. For every confiscation, another bolt hidden under another counter. Lace keeps falling like winter. The patrols keep scraping it from the streets. Why such fervour? Because clothes are an X-ray. If a butcher's daughter wears sable, then what is a duke to be? If an alderman's wife drapes herself in a blue too close to Mary's mantle, then who is Mary to command? Sumptuary law is the elite's firewall against social malware. It quarantines aspiration and keeps imitation from crashing the system. Officially, it is about moral restraint and civic modesty. Actually, it is about keeping the map legible at a glance. Which brings us to the clerk. The eye that makes the law a lived thing. Watch him on a feast day. When the city is most itself, his ink is already dry on everyone else's mourning. He stands at the church door with a small wax tablet and a mind like a measuring rod. A procession approaches, guild banners, then girls in veils pale as a sigh. He clocks furs the way a miller reads grain. Vair trim at 3 fingers' width, permitted. A glint of sable on a shoulder that should know better note it. A gold chain, heavy enough to tug at the neck of a man whose title feels too light record it. A velvet train trailing 1 hand span beyond what the ordinance allows. He nods to the beadle, who steps forward with a pin and a pair of sharp shears. Snip, the fabric sighs, and so does the crowd. At the market cross after mass, he circles the sweet sellers and mercers. He touches lace with the back of his knuckle, counting picots like sins. A young wife's cuff blooms too richly. He raises an eyebrow, and she lowers her eyes. Unpicks a row with trembling fingers while her husband blusters about custom and family honour. A widow's veil is starched into a small architecture of grief severe. Permitted. He lets her pass. He pauses by a group of prentices bragging about the new ribbons they'll buy. He reminds them, gently but legibly, of the statute that bars them from peacock colours. A visor lifts. A knight smiles at his own reflection in the polished dome of a helmet. The clerk notes the metalwork on the knight's woman's stomacher instead. The pen does not care for armour. The pen cares for lace. At the Guildhall door, he inspects the tailors themselves. Fines for those who have sewn forbidden trim. Warnings for those whose measuring tapes stray towards sedition. He is not cruel, only consistent. But consistency feels like cruelty when it bites your favourite sleeve. At Vespers, he will scrape his tablet into clean wax and sleep well. A dozen households will not. The paradox is that these laws scold women for seeming to want luxury, while the same society orders them to be lovely, preferably memorably so. Be elegant. The matron advises, but not too elegant, which is to say, be legible, to be aspirational. But don't confuse the reader about which page you belong to. A dress should suggest means, never ambition. A jewel should read as inheritance, never acquisition. A fur should warm a rank, not a body. The state does not mind splendour. As long as splendour keeps to its zip code, You learn strategies. You let your seamstress sew removable borders. You can unbutton in a breeze if a beadle frowns. You choose velvets dyed just one shade down from danger, the color of restraint rather than rebellion. You wear your pearls as a rosary and count them out loud. You practice looking poor in the right light and rich in the right company. You keep a plain cloak near the door and a basket over your rings. When the bell tolls for inspection, you cultivate the art of almost gold, almost ermine, almost Marion blue, because almost is rarely fined. Tailors become accomplices and casualties. They cache forbidden trims, stitch secret channels where a ribbon may live unseen, calculate the legal length of a train to the finger joint, the nail, the breath. A mistake is a summons, a flourish is a court date. The needle writes as many petitions as it does sleeves, and the humiliations keep the lesson memorable. A girl is stopped outside a church because her hood's fur is half a finger too wide. The beadle trims it while she stares at the stone and swallows her tears. A matron's belt is weighed actual weights on an iron hook and declared too heavy with silver. A fine follows, and a gossip. A bride's gift of blue ribbons from her kin abroad is confiscated because the dye is royal. The wedding goes on, but the poems written about it acquire a bitter rhyme. Still, the laws never quite do what they promise. Wealth finds new edges to polish. Ambition learns to lie low. Style, like water, runs around obstacles until it finds a place to glitter. The clerk can snip and note and frown, but he cannot stop a woman from learning the grammar of almost, nor can he keep lace from falling again next winter. The city forbids and forgives, and forbids again, and women keep walking the seam. On your best days you refuse to let the shears be the last word. You cultivate elegance that reads as good order, not greed. You teach your daughter how to count the finger widths on a fur and the heartbeats before she answers a clerk. You show her the Venice case as a warning. Virtue cannot live in secret pearls. The London raids as a lesson markets always push back, and the feast day montage as a map. And when she asks why the law cares so fiercely about sleeves, you tell her the truth, because sleeves are easier to police than souls. Then you take her hand, pass the clerk with a nod, and let your almost blue catch the light without catching the law. In a world where faces are verdicts, deviation becomes danger. The signs are petty and merciless. A hooked nose read as cunning, pitted cheeks as corruption, coarse hair as animal heat, a limp as proof of hidden sin. Youth fades, childbirth scars, smallpox frets the skin, and the village decides your inner life must match your exterior. Beauty is presumed virtue. Ugly becomes probable cause. Class sharpens the blade. A duchess's hawk nose is Roman noble. Antique. A peasant widow's is witchish. A court lady's dark brows are lyrical. The midwife's are ill-omened. The eye is never neutral. It reports to power. The midwife is the easiest target because she works at the door between worlds. When life fails to cross, someone must be blamed, preferably a woman with rough hands, and no lord to shield her. So the story keeps repeating. The child dies. Grief becomes rumour. Rumour becomes doctrine. And doctrine already has a script ready for her body. Hilda call her Hilda, because there is always a Hilda has delivered half the parish and buried a handful. She knows which herbs quiet a hemorrhage and which prayers steady a terrified father. She also knows that a bad season of grain, a drunk husband with a bruised wife, a stillborn son, all of that needs a mouth to swallow the bitterness. The mouth is hers. The machinery of suspicion draws from everywhere at once old folk fears, new demonology, civic panic, a theologian's tidy Latin lines about women's bodies as disordered, become village gossip in the mouth of a beadled clerk, books like Nida's Tales of Witches and, later, that bile-soaked manual of paranoia, the Malleus, repackage misogyny as expertise. Priests quote them from pulpits. Neighbours quote them over fences. Then the knock. Then the room with a table and a basin, and men who smell of ink and righteousness. The test won't be what she did. It will be what she looks like while denying it. A transcript, because the eye wants proof. Town of Koltfeld, Michaelmas term, proceedings against Hilda, midwife, clerk, name and craft, Hilda, wife, once of Jacob the Cooper, midwife by need, bailiff, the child of Hans Miller born dead. You are in the room. Hilda, the cord was twice about the neck. Priest, twice like a serpent. Did you speak charms? Hilda, I prayed the Ave. Neighbor Johanna. She keeps dried roots by her stove. Hilda, Angelica for fevers. Clerk, show your arms. Hilda rolls her sleeves. A scar along the forearm. Bailiff, this mark, devil's kiss. Hilda, a dog bit me in Lent, asked the tanner. Priest, yet her eyes see how she looks down. Crafty, Hilda, I look down because you are 3 men, and I am alone. Clerk, note, avoids the gaze. Writes poorly. Bailiff, we shall have the wise woman prick her skin. If a place feels nothing, that place is the devil's. Hilda, I feel plenty. Priest, that is for God to judge, and us to record. No broomsticks, no sabbats, merely a scar, a habit of looking at the floor, a bundle of roots, a dead child. In the margin of the clerk's book, someone will write suspect for pride because she answered too steadily, or suspect for sorcery because she wept without sobbing, or suspect for envy because her neighbour's daughter quickened, while this one did not. The note will be neat. The ache will be permanent. Some women survive by inventing an office for themselves. In the fear, the cunning woman sells counterspells to men who laugh at her when the sun is up and pay her at dusk. She blesses cows, finds lost spoons, mixes a love draught, mild enough to be called tea. She wears her oddness like a cloak on market daylets. Rumour halo her a little, because awe is safer than pity, and safer still than contempt. In good seasons, she becomes indispensable. In bad seasons, she becomes a threat, because influence without charter frays the nerves of men with seals. So the same men who sent their wives to her for women's pains summon her to prove absence of a devil's mark. Her skill at herbs becomes a ledger of poisons. Her dreams, evidence. She is asked to list the names of other women she learned from. The names are already in the clerks' heads. They want a mouth to carry the blame across. When she refuses, they call it stubbornness, which reads as guilt. The cruelty is theatrical, because theatre teaches pricking tests reduce skin to spectacle. The water ordeal rare, yes, and yet remembered with fanatic clarity uses survival as confession. Shaved heads search for the devil's teats. Nakedness, for truth's sake, becomes humiliation as pedagogy. Neighbours watch. Daughters learn. Even without a trial, the ordinary courts of opinion are busy. A rash becomes a rumour. The devil licked her. A birthmark. A map of sin. The limp from a childhood fall. A sign of secret dancing with spirits. Scarcity heats the imagination. Bread is short. Tempers long. And suddenly the woman who argues too sharply at the bake oven is blamed for curdled milk across 5 households. She is ugly, because to call her that is to simplify the story in a way that keeps the speakers comfortable. She is witch, because that word tidies an untidy world. And yet resistance. Women write what we might call beauty confessionals into letters and book margins, blaming their unlovely faces for coldness. They meet in church, begging God to forgive the body he gave them. The words sting, but they are still words, and words can be knives with handles. Some use them that way. Judge me by my work. One widow scrawls beside a recipe for a fever draught. Not by my jaw. A line like a lit fuse. Ironies multiply. Traits feared in a midwife jet hair. Arched brows, to a hard gaze, become fashion on a duchess under candlelight, praised as Burgundian severity. A mole on a lady's cheek is flirtation. The same mark on a reeve's wife is devil's seal. One village's wise mother is the next parish's black hen. The body doesn't change. The story does. The story belongs to whoever owns the room. Men die in this panic, 2 cunning men, millers with bad tempers and worse luck. But the net is woven for women, especially the old, the spare, the unprotected, especially those whose economic usefulness has ended but whose memory is inconvenient. A grandson wants her cottage, a neighbour wants her goat. Suddenly her warts are evidence, her loneliness motive, her cat, a familiar, the charge packages, property transfer, inside moral drama, so you learn counter-arts. Keep your herbs in plain jars with names a priest can read. Call your remedies. Receipts copied from a nun. Not charms told by a grandmother. Let your granddaughter braid your hair to soften the line of your brow. If you must rebuke a man, do it at a christening. When the room is full of witnesses inclined to mercy. When you weep, let it be audible. When you pray, let it be seen. The point is not piety, it is legibility. Safety clings to the visible like lint, but safety has its own price. You must collaborate in the lie that faces tell souls. You must nod when a clerk stares at a scar like a map and calls it the devil's itinerary. You must tuck your chin at sermons that praise beauty as virtue and condemn you for the gift you were not given. If there's any justice in this chapter, it is local, stubborn, and private. A baker's wife hands Hilda a loaf, still warm after the hearing, and says nothing. A tanner testifies that yes, his dog bit her in Lent. A girl whom Hilda once steadied through a hemorrhage becomes a woman, then a mother, then allowed presents at the market. If she is a witch, then let all witches come when my babies are born. The crowd laughs. Nervously, and sometimes nervous laughter, is the first crack in a hard mask. Even so, the ledger of harms is thick. Ugly is a slur that turns into scaffolding. Witch is a fear that turns into a mechanism. And beneath both is the same stale logic. If a woman is not pleasing to the eye, then nature is protesting something inside her. The law, the pulpit, and the gossip all nod together at that lie. It is efficient. It is devastating. What endures are the small refusals. A woman keeping her herbs in clear glass and her head high. A neighbour telling a counter. Story in the square. A girl looking in the mirror and naming her cheekbones. Not her sins. The danger does not vanish. It learns new names in later centuries. But so do the women. Hilda, whoever she is in your archive, does not need your pity. She needs what the transcript withheld. An advocate and a different lens. She also needs time to keep doing the quiet work that sustained the village before it judged her. The child will be born tonight, and someone will have to steady the breathing. The priest will not come. The clerk cannot. The neighbours will arrive with candles. And there, in the worst hour, and the truest, the ugly hands will be the ones everyone reaches for. Walk with me into a gallery where the air is cool and the fabric breathes. On the far wall, a forest has been woven out of silence. A lady in crimson, a lion rampant, a unicorn docile as a chapel lamb. To the left, a procession of vines and rabbits and improbable flowers. To the right, a sixth panel whose motto winks like a riddle, Mon seul, dessert. These are the unicorn tapestries, whose surface is all velvet obedience, whose subtext is drill. The beast can only be tamed by a virgin. The virgin is tamed by a code. Watch how the choreography works. Her hand hovers over a casket of jewels, but her eyes refuse to meet yours. Constraint masquerades as elegancy. Want masquerades as virtue. Somewhere behind the hedgerow, an entire century is learning what a good woman looks like. The trick is older than these looms. Open a book of hours and note the faces. The virgin, the donor's wife, the martyr, all copied from the same workshop pattern book. Clone faces with delicate ovals and slivered mouths. Foreheads like blank parchment. Eyes that seem wet but never red. Illuminators called it idealization. A better word is instruction. The miniatures do not record a person. They rehearse a role. If your cheek is not that smooth, make it so, or at least make it look so. If your brow is not high, pluck backward until it is. If your eyes are curious, lower them. The script leaks off the page and into the mirror. Painters refine the lesson. Commissions arrive with polite lies attached. Brighten the eyes a little, a husband writes. Lessen the nose. If it please you. He wants a wife whose portrait confirms his judgment. The artist elongates the neck until it reads as swan-like, powders the skin until it reads as blameless. A mole vanishes. A line of the mouth retreats. He adds a sliver of lily to an otherwise empty table there. Now she is chaste, and a prayer book with a ribbon turned to the hours of the Virgin there. Now she is pious, even while she sits. In another workshop, a lapdog curls on a skirt, a visual pun for fidelitas, fidelity, domesticated. If the lady is politically necessary, the painter might thread a unicorn into the background shrubbery, a medieval halo with hooves. This is propaganda, but the kind that smiles while it works. It does not rant. It whispers. It teaches you to confuse whiteness with innocence, stillness with goodness, smallness with safety. It repeats the message until repetition feels like memory. By the third room, you are correcting yourself without being asked. Pan 1. Fabric dusk. The forest of the tapestries glows with reds and midnight blues that refuse to fade. The lady holds a banner. The unicorn presses a knee into her skirt like a kneeling knight. On the margins, rabbits nibble and birds converse, and nothing ever bleeds. The allegory is so polite you can forget it bites. Purity captures power. Power calls the capture virtue. The maiden smiles and calls the trap a garden. Your eyes search for a flaw. A wrinkle in the woven face, a strand of hair out of place. But the lady has been engineered not to blink. Pan 2. A manuscript case. Gold leaf. Catching the slow light. Turn to a miniature of the Annunciation. Mary's face. The donor's wife's face. The attendant angel's face. The same geometry repeated with fractional adjustments, as though holiness were a stencil and the human a wall. Note the angle of the head obedience. Note the hands folded, not reaching. Note the egg. Shell blue lapis ground to prove expensive humility. A child hovering behind you whispers, "They all look alike." Precisely. That was the point. If 1,000 women look like one woman, then one woman can be judged by 1,000 rules. Pan 3. Oil on panel. A noble woman, 3/4 to the viewer, the background flattened to emphasize that she belongs in a world without depth. Jewels rim her hairline. The hairline itself is a hair too far back. On the sill, a book, a lily, a pomander, a little dog piety, purity, sweet breath, loyalty, a family coat of arms just visible on a ring. This is not a portrait. It is a curriculum vitae. It does not ask, "Who is she?" It answers, "What is she for?" The eyes, again, never blink. There are exceptions, but they prove the rule. A straight-talking abbess commissions herself with a pen in hand and a frown of attention. A scandal in paint. A widow allows the painter to keep the crow's feet at her eyes, and the line above her mouth. Comments will follow. A queen insists on the scar left from a difficult birth. The painter complies and darkens the shadows around the mouth to restore the world's preferred fragility. Art can argue. More often, it trades. The images work backward on their owners. A girl grows up beneath a wall hanging of The Lady and the Unicorn and learns the coordinates of her posture, chin lowered, hands quiet. The profile available for admiration but never appetite. A merchant's daughter copies the donor's wife in the miniature, tilts her head, narrows her mouth so that she looks correct when the priest glances her way. Even women who scoff at tapestries carry their stage directions in their shoulders. Men, for their part, calibrate their gaze. The lapdog means faithful. The lily means pure. The book means she knows how to appear serious without threatening anyone with the contents. Symbols become shortcuts. Shortcuts become beliefs. Beliefs become verdicts. If you want the engine room of the illusion, go behind the panels. Pattern books pass from master to apprentice. Noses, chins, hands, the holy teardrop eye. A sheet of female profiles, one girlish, one maternal, one widow hollow gets traced and retraced until it feels like species, not style. Workshops keep bowls of gesso, the color of chalk confession. Nobody records the aftercare for the women who tried to match that hue. The ledger records pigments azurite, vermilion, verdigrisses. and the cost of lapis suggests where the blue cloth will appear, on saints and on women paid to resemble them. Propaganda loves symbols, because symbols don't argue. The dog at the hem says, "Trust me." The mirror, when it appears in secular scenes, warns of vanity while inviting you to look, and so the woman holding it is both cautionary tale and advertisement. The unicorn is the purest sugar, a promise that chastity can domesticate even the wildest power. If you are thinking of politics, you are not wrong. A court that displays a unicorn declares that it has mastered desire and therefore deserves obedience. A duke whose wife sits amid lilies tells rival houses he controls the boundary between beauty and scandal, and will punish any rumor that leaps the fence. But art can also leak the truth despite itself. Look closely at the woven lady's wrist, reddened where the bracelet sits too tight. Look at the miniature angel's hand, smudged where the pigment bled an illuminator's tiredness on a Thursday in Lent. Look at the oil portrait's left eye, which the painter could not quite make match the right, a human asymmetry that survives the patron's demands. In those chinks, an antidote sparkles. If you can find it, you can learn to see the frame as well as the picture. Until then, the eyes keep teaching. A lady in silk learns to tilt. A farmer's wife learns to disappear in church. A painter learns what a husband once erased. A child learns to measure a woman by her props. We call it heritage. It behaves like training. The gallery empties. The guards begin their slow orbit. From the door you look back, and every face is still doing its work calm. Pale, elongated, perfected. You realize you have been staring for an hour, and none of them have blinked. You blink for them and turn away, newly fluent in a language you didn't consent to learn, already translating the next woman you meet into lilies and dogs and books and beasts that kneel when told. Begin at ground level, a rush-strewn hall, a hem that grazes the straw, and peeking like a secret, the soft crescent of a slipper. In the manuals of court desire, the foot is never a tool. It is a token. It should be small enough to vanish when asked, white enough to suggest it has never met a road, and obedient enough to go where it's placed, not where it wishes. That fiction drives a whole economy of leather and linen. Cobblers stitch dreams, so delicate they can barely endure a corridor. Ladies pay for shoes that whisper on stone. And if the world outside is wet, rutted, unspeakably alive, with the animal facts of town, life well, that is why God made servants and boards and men's backs. Slippers first, a thin vamp, turned sole, kid-soft leather, a ribbon at the ankle to hold them fast when the floor turns treacherous with wine and wax. Their task is not protection, but proof. Proof that you need no protection. Slip into them, and you telegraph a dozen messages at once. I am carried. I am cushioned. The ground is not my enemy. Across the hall, a maid kneels to buff their toes with wool and a breath of oil. A boy places them just so beneath your chair, so the curve of instep can be glimpsed but not gawped at. In some portraits, that instep is all the painter needs to signal rank, an arch like the bow of a lute, the small bones reading as a private melody. Step outside, and the fantasy meets mud. Streets are a stew rain, dung, slop from the kitchens, refuse from the tanner's yard. Practical shoes exist, of course, sturdier leather, a thicker welt, but practical is not a virtue in the theatre of rank. Enter the pattern, a wooden or metal overshoe, strapped beneath the slipper to raise the wearer above the flood. They clack, they tilt, they punish haste. The court adopts them, the way the court adopts every inconvenience that advertises leisure, loudly. You learn to walk like a metronome heel. Pause. 2. Pause your balance a prayer. If you stumble, an arm appears. If the street is too foul, even for patterns, a pair of pages go ahead with broadboards, laying a little causeway one step at a time, so your shoes never know the earth. On grand days, a household may even send men with carpet runners to unroll over puddles, cloth blooms over filth. You float. The watching poor stare. The lesson is not subtle. Then there are the show-offs. Poulain, Krakows, the long-nosed comedy and menace of the 14th and 15th centuries. The point on these creatures lengthens past all sense, first a finger, then a hand, then a curve you must stuff with moss or wool to keep the beak aloft. To walk, you lace the tip to your knee with a ribbon hidden beneath the hose. Otherwise it will swing like a weather vane and dump you at the first cobble. Men embrace the absurdity as a challenge. Some women, too, adopt slender versions that make their feet look like delicate quills. City councils fume. During festivals and holy processions, the year's great crowded hours wardens are set to measure and scold, and sometimes to clip, no point beyond a hand's breadth. One edict sniffs, another threatens fines, for the inconvenience and peril of the people, because a stampede is no place for a yard of ego on each shoe. You want an image? Take the Feast of Corpus Christi in a market town where everyone's patience is thin with heat. Drapers have hung their cloth, butchers their garlands, fishwives their prayers against the smell. The guilds march with their wagons of pageant Noah scolding, an angel with paper fire, a devil grinning through soot. Into this narrow artery, a young lord arrives wearing poulains ambitious enough to write his biography. He refuses to dismount. His grooms hover. A beadle's staff wraps his horse's flank. The saint's canopy wobbles. A child steps on one pointed toe. He lurches. A baker's boy trips on the other. The left beak comes untied and begins to nose its way under the hem of the Virgin's canopy like a ferret. Laughter. Then a collective gasp. As the canopy dips, a warden darts in with a knife, trims an inch off the offending snout. Public safety and civic comedy. In one brisk gesture, the Lord blusters. The crowd cheers. The procession moves again. Later, over alle, the town will tell the story 20 different ways. But in each version the moral matches the shoe. Too long, too silly, too proud for the street. The theatre of the foot is not only about shape, but scent. Nobody expects bodies to smell like roses. But the closer the court comes to that miracle, the more it insists it was inevitable. Shoes, when they cannot be washed, are sweetened. A sachet of rosemary stitched into the lining, a twist of lemon peel tucked near the heel, mint crushed under the insole. So each step expresses a faint garden. There are rinses for the evening wine warmed with bay and sage. A basin by the fire where a lady soaks and a maid dries, then powders the toes with rice flour to keep them shy and matte. Before Vespers, a household can smell like a small apothecary. Clove, lavender, beeswax, the tang of vinegar used to wipe the floor. You could believe you are among lilies, not people. Poets oblige the illusion. They praise a heel as whiter than new milk, an instep as arched like the bow God gave the sky. They make theology out of anatomy. The smallness of her step means she treads lightly on the world. The cleanness of her foot proofs her soul. Troubadours sing feet that barely bend the grass. Courtly romancers specify the long nail of the second toe as a sign that love will rule her life. It is nonsense with consequences. Girls listen. Men memorize. Shoes shrink accordingly. But not every holy foot is jeweled. In paintings of penitent women and pilgrim saints, the shoes vanish, and the naked soul becomes its own argument. Mary Magdalene goes barefoot into the wilderness. Martyrs stand with their toes in the dust. Hermitesses whose names are forgotten walk roads that grind their feet into maps. Barefoot is humility, poverty, penitence, authenticity. It is also risk. A noblewoman who walked barefoot to mass might win whispers of piety or of performance. A peasant woman whose cracked heels show at the field's edge invites judgment she did not audition for. Context writes the caption. Between jeweled slipper and saintly soul is the practical world that doesn't make it into poems. Servants who carry their ladies across puddles also carry their own patched boots home and dry them by the coals. Cobblers' wives pick pebbles out of second-hand soles and sell them to apprentices. In winter, a boy learns to grease his stockings with tallow to keep the damp from his bones. The ground touches most people, most of the time. The fantasy of floating belongs to the few, and yet even you who know the trick feel the tug of it when the door opens, and a short runway of clean boards appears across a courtyard mottled with rain. There is a thrill in stepping where no filth can follow. in hearing the pattern's clack echo under a stone archway, in performing the grammar of float and glide, when a page kneels and steadies your ankle as you step down from a cart, a quick heat moves in the chest that isn't entirely about status. It is about choreography, about being part of a story larger than your body, about participating in the ancient human wish to move through the world without being marked by it. The cost, of course, is your balance. Shoes that protect only the idea of a foot produce ankles that twist, strides that shorten into ornamental gestures, slippers that prove you don't touch earth ensure you don't learn how. Even the deodorized illusions demand rent. Rosemary and lemon peel are small alchemies you must remember to renew. Another ritual, on the long rosary of being looked at, and those poets, the ones who turned your instep into a relic, have no verses for corns, no rooms for blisters, no sonnets for a foot that has walked too far because the litter failed to arrive. In the great ledger of medieval beauty, the entry for feet is simple and savage. To be admired, they must not function. To be holy, they must suffer. To be safe, they must be carried. And to be real, they must do what all feet finally do, find the ground. You will know the moment you stop floating. It is a small, soft sound leather meeting earth and a jolt in the knees like honesty. After a day of boards and pages and points laced to knees, you will slip off your shoes at the edge of your bed, curl your toes, and absorb the ache. You will press your soles together and feel the heat you made. You will bless the floorboards for being floorboards and not a stage. Then, tomorrow, you will perform again, as if your feet had never learned the word wait. Dawn comes thin and pewter, a line of cold along the sill, and the maid with the basin moves like a shadow. The water is a bite, the cloth rough linen. Your breath fogs the polished metal of the mirror. This is the beginning of the loop. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. The vinegar goes on first, sliced with wine, and a pinch of crushed herbs to say nature, not need. The cloth rasps along the cheeks. Over the brow you've plucked into docility. It stings. Promise purity. You do not flinch. The rustle of your shift answers the wind at the shutters. A pewter ewer clinks the lip of the bowl. Bells at prime mumble through the stone. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. Now the mask. White lead cerused rested all night in a cup. So the heavy poison sank and the smoother cream rose. Your maid stirs from the top, like skimming fat from broth. With a padded cloth she pats the ivory sheen along your jaw, your temples, the high plane of your cheeks. The cool is a relief, until it tightens, and the face becomes a porcelain vow, a touch of alkanet root in egg white for the glow of maid blood. A pinhead of cinnabar to nurse the mouth into barely. There, you blot, layer, blot, the craft learned from women who learned it from paintings. The mirror gives you the stranger you're required to be. Cloth, metal, scent, silence, hair, unbound. It is a risk. Braided. It is a promise. The comb has been warmed near the embers and oiled with a breath of rosemary. Your scalp is map and memory tiny welt, where a pin bit last feast day, a tender patch where the bleach scorched. The maid parts with a bone pick and plaits tight to the skull. You feel the pull at the temples like a quiet invitation to obedience. The coif goes on, fine linen tied firm. The veil follows. More linen, more pins. 4 little stabs at the crown, 2 at the ears, 1 under the chin, and your face is framed like a shrine. Pinheads flash, pricks of light, pricks of rule. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. The kirtle waits with its laces coiled like a warning. You plant your hands on the bedpost, polished by generations of breath and bracing. Exhale, the maid pulls. Right side, left side, that tiny hitch at the rib where air used to live. The body lengthens into the silhouette required by poems and laws. Your spine learns the line again. A second woman joins to smooth the busk and settle the seams. When the laces stop singing, the world goes a notch quieter. The pressure is a belt of winter around the waist. Over it all, the gown wool or velvet, depending on the hour. The weight like a covenant slides down your arms. The belt buckles with a soft kiss of metal. You are dressed like an argument you didn't write. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. Practice the glide. 10 paces along the rushes. Turn, 10 paces back. Toes first, then heel. The long skirts nudged with a finger at the knee, hands folded. So the rings whisper rather than ring. Shoulders low, head high, eyes patient. The doorposts remember every woman who misjudged a hem and nearly married the floor. You don't intend to join their fellowship. You pass the beeswax taper burning in its sconce. You smell church and honey. Inhale through the nose. A polite woman inhales like a secret. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. Breakfast is ceremony, not meal. A heel of bread, the color of straw, a slice of quince paste, watered wine, perhaps broth if you woke light. Headed, your stomach presses against the kirtle's fence, and you pretend the flutter is holiness. You eat as if the food belongs to someone else. Small bites, long pauses, the little trick of tucking what you cannot swallow into the napkin's fold. Ahmed brings a saucher, of fennel seeds, mint, and 2 cloves, to anchor your breath in respectability. Speak only when the talk lands on your lap like a sparrow. Send it away with something charming but toothless. Let your mouth be a chapel, open rarely, echo softly. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. The house wakes. Accounts are read. Petitions carried from tenants are weighed by men who think in measures and shoulders. Your work is steadiness, the set of the head, the pleasant gravity of attention, a hand laid briefly on a sleeve to cool a quarrel. Stitching comes out, silk through linen, image on image vine. Bird, border work that proves you were meant for interiors. A page brings perfumed gloves. The kids soaked weeks ago in ambergris and orange peel. You draw them on like sanctuary and breathe through your fingers when the hall's stew of bodies grows thick. Somewhere, the chapel hush gathers. You answer it without moving. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. Midday is procession. Through the screen's passage, across the courtyard, wheels of the kitchen cart turning in grey mud. If the sky is mean, pattens are buckled under slippers, and you climb onto clacking stilts like a bird. A boy lays boards over the worst of it. The wind runs fingers under your veil. And for a scandalous instant you feel your own scalp. In the great hall of a cousin's house you sit and are seen. A cousin's wife admires the embroidery at your cuff. You admire hers. That is diplomacy in a language of thread. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. Afternoon is the slow calculus of posture. You measure yourself against benches, windows, men's attention. If you laugh, measure it in grains. If you dance court steps, a pavane, the gown moves like a tide, and you rise and fall on it without splashing. When your breath turns sharp under the laces, you find the window and let the cold argue with the corsetry. Reapply the mask in a quiet corner. A dab of powder to calm the shine. A touch to the mouth, but not so much that a priest could write a sermon on it. You catch your reflection in the little convex mirror carried by your maid, your face, distant as a star. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. Vespers deposits ash of quiet on everything. Incense leans in curls along the nave. Your throat lifts with the chant, then sinks back into composure. The pew bit your ribs last week. Today you shift before it can. A child fidgets. You lend your stillness like a shawl by sitting beside her. A priest's eyes pass over you the way water passes over a stone approval. Assumption, a blessing made of certainty. You lower your gaze until the moment is done. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. Supper performs plenty, not appetite. Platters parade pike in parsley. Capon gilded with saffron. Marchpane like snow. You touch, you taste, you praise. Men talk tides of war and wool. You steer small conversations like boats along the edge, never out where the current is strong. Your back begins to hum, where the laces press the muscle. You smile through it, finding the relief in the tiny swing of a pendant against your breastbone. In the firelight, faces take on the soft wrongness of icons more beautiful, less alive. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. Night is the unmaking, the only part that belongs entirely to you and the women who know your bones. The maid unpins the veil, 12 little clicks of liberty, and your hair relaxes like a held breath released. She eases the coif, and you feel the first cool kiss of air on the scalp all day. The gown lifts with a collective sigh of fabric. The belt's tongue slides from its buckle with a sound like a secret forgiven. Then the laces slowly, so your heart can find its old rhythm without startling unspool down your sides. And the ribs release their hymn. Purpled indentations rise like geography along the back. You trace them with 2 fingers and name no saints. At the basin again, vinegar first to melt the day, then warm rosewater to soothe the argument you made of your skin. The lead comes away in ghostly swipes on the cloth, revealing the blotches you negotiated into invisibility at dawn. The alcanet leaves a wan memory along the cheek. The cinnabar surrenders in a pink sigh. You pat on night ointment goose fat, honey, a whisper of almond, and the sting softens to something mortal. Your maid rubs your scalp with wine and rosemary. You hiss, and then you thank her. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. Your feet go into the shallow wooden bath and float like 2 exhausted animals. The day's rosemary and lemon, crushed in the shoes, reappear in the steam echoes of pretense, alchemized into comfort. You roll your ankles. Somewhere, a joint pops like a kernel. The ring comes off and taps the table, a small metronome of permission. You do not speak. There is nothing to say that the room does not already know. Cloth, metal, scent, silence. In the straw-stuffed hush of the bed, do you inventory the ledger of costs and gains? A compliment that will season a rumour the right way. A cousin's grimace you caught and filed for later. A pulse of pride at the way you walked the hall without touching anything at all. And the private taxes, skin that burns under the balm, ribs that throb where the cord kissed, a scalp drawn tight as a drum. Beyond the shutter, the town exhales dogs. A card, the late bell life that doesn't care about veils. You close your eyes and, before sleep, you picture the loop unwinding at dawn and rewinding by dusk. A rosary of gestures. The shift, the laces, the mask, cloth, metal, scent, silence. Feast day turns the city blue. Not the ordinary woad of workaday tunics, but that peculiar, costly sky, the painters crushed from lapis, Mary's hue draped on banners, glazed in windows, stitched at hems. You dress for the role as every woman must, hair sheathed, neck veiled, hands folded in the grammar of obedience. The face you put on is not yours so much as hers serene, unsmiling, candle-lit from within. In the nave, you become an arrangement. Blue, linen, stillness, the choir chants, and you feel the old current, how holiness and beauty were braided until the braid hardened into a handle. Someone could lift you by it. Isabella of Castile understood that handle like a craftsman. In portraits, she is a winter candle white veil, Marian blue, rosary pricking the quiet with beads of light. She ruled with ledgers and iron, but her public image wore humility, the way a knight wears mail, as armor. The message was simple as a prayer card. A queen who looks like the Virgin must be doing God's work. Policy learned to speak in fabric. Conquest learned to kneel in colour. Elsewhere, the lesson flipped its coin. Agzen's sorrel mistress to Charles VII made splendour her argument. Fur soft as sin at her throat. Pearls like rosaries that had forgotten their purpose. Bodices cut so low. Bishops found themselves revising sermons. Mid-sentence, she weaponized radiance, lifting a bruised court out of its sulk with the shock of pleasure. Silk, skin, a smile confident as a treaty. It worked until it didn't. Rumour is the tax levied on female success. She paid in whispers and finally in death. Her body read like a pamphlet for poison or medicine gone wrong. Even buried, her legend had to pick a side, saint to the king, scandal to his enemies. Because men require diagrams of women more than they require women. In Venice, the Cortigian Oneste perfected a third script, beauty armed with grammar. Silk gowns, yes, but also sonnets. Perfume, yes, but also Plato. They received ambassadors like equals and poets like prey, traded in wit as much as in glances, and hosted salons where the Republic's mask slipped and ideas showed their teeth. Their bodies got them in the room. Their minds rearranged the furniture. The price of that audacity was constant peril envy, denunciation, the soft-shoed step of the Inquisition in a rainy alley. But for a breath of history they chose authorship over ornament. They knew the secret most courts kept. If you cannot escape the stage, direct the play. And yet, for every daring neckline or sharpened sonnet, the daily cage held, the wimple moved when you moved, a travelling cloister. It confessed for you before you opened your mouth. Pins at the temple, pins at the crown, cloth cupping the chin. The apparatus said modesty the way a chain says property. Step into the street unveiled, and the street wrote your story for you. Step into church unveiled, and the sermon found your name. Even death was enlisted. The saint's body, glassed and garlanded, invited a gaze that would have been scandalous in life. Hands ungloved, feet barred, jaw wired, shut into everlasting docility, odour of sanctity. They called the sweetness reported around certain corpses a final compliance, the flesh agreeing at last to be pleasant. Pilgrims pressed their faces to reliquaries, studying the wax-smooth mask, the jewelled bones, the smallness made eternal. Beauty that never talks back is the most collectible kind, and so the loveliest danger arrives in time, not rumour. Aging is the quiet heresy. The mirror stops collaborating. The portrait stops being a promise and starts being a ghost. The court looks over your shoulder for the next girl taught to breathe without sound. But the map also shifts. As wife becomes widow, the law uneven, but sometimes merciful finds clauses where power can hide. Property managed, contracts signed, a household steered through famine, a nephew's future decided in a room where men have mistaken your silence for agreement. Behind the heavy veil, a hand moves pieces on the board. A dowager is a rumour with receipts. The church knows this too. It paints its matriarchs as marble perfect, unweathered, while the living woman behind the frame writes letters no painter will read. The court knows it. It praises a maiden's pliancy while relying, in crisis, on an old woman's ledgers. The city knows it. It fines a girl for lace and begs a widow for loans. What is called disappearance from the feast is sometimes merely relocation to the counting room, where the music is quieter, but the instruments are sharper. If the Middle Ages had stopped at the city gate, you could hang your veil there and be done. But the logic walked on, trading parchment for pixels. Today the Marian palette returns as clean beauty, sainted by ingredients and sermons in lowercase. The wimple reappears as the algorithmic demand for effortless perfection, hair that implies prayerful sleep, skin that suggests a moral. Courtiers still gather at festivals. Only the pavilions are apps, and the pageantry is authenticity. Relics have become influencers' bodies vitrined by ring lights, fragranced by copy, odour of sanctity. Meet the scent of a sponsored post. Even the corpse aesthetic survived. Faces filtered to a waxen quiet, where pores and opinions have the good manners to die. And yet, take inventory of every handle they've tried to lift you by. The braid of virtue and beauty, the title, angelic, the threat of scandal, the promise of incense, the hush that rewards a woman who subtracts herself. Then, by candle stub or phone glow, choose a smaller word. No. No to Marian cosplay as merit badge. Yes to faith. If you want it, on your terms and in your voice. No to the weaponized gown that buys you an hour of power and a year of whispers. Yes to adornment that pleases the wearer first. No to the museum of female obedience wax saints and glass cases. Yes to bodies that sweat, laugh, scar, and keep going. No to the politics that grade women by their stillness. Yes to the ledger kept by widows and workers. and anyone whose hands learned more than prayer. Unpin the moving cage. Let the veil be fabric again, not law. Take the blue because you like the color, not because it certifies your soul. Step out of the portrait's shallow breath and fill your lungs all the way to the back. If you must perform, make it a refusal people can hear. If you must be looked at, look back until the gaze remembers it has an owner. The choir finishes. The smoke thins. You leave the feast day, and the city shrugs off its costume, and the echo of all those scripts follows you into the lane. You can walk to it, as others did, or you can stop, lift your chin, and let the pins fall one by one into your palm. The Marian blue, the mistress's pearls, the mummy's glass case. Lovely stories, all of them. But the truest artifact in the room is the breath you take for yourself, the step you choose that is not an entrance, but an exit. Let the rumor be this: she wrote her own ending.